art kids, those creative minds engaged. Some of these kids are the type that, they can watch videos and they'll learn from that. So we're going to watch this video today, and, that's not going to work for everybody, but it's going to work for some of the kids. So as much as it may seem like make busy work, it's really trying to cater to everyone out there and figure out how everybody learns best. And when you've got a class full of 30 kids or something like that, you can't have 30 different ways to teach. So you kind of have to pick and choose some of the more mainstream ones that'll help the kids out. I think that's probably what you're running into. And for you, because you're like my developers, if the teachers can't keep you engaged, you get bored and you dislike it. My developers are just like that. And it sounds like some of your teachers are not keeping you engaged. And the intelligent, creative kids are the ones that are really hard to keep engaged, because you're the ones that, you can figure things out very quickly. I hand you a Rubik's Cube and you solve it in 5 minutes, you're bored with it at that point. What am I going to do? Well, then I start taking the colored stickers off of it, and I start putting different colored stickers on there and seeing how you figure that one out. That's how you would do something like that. Let you think outside the box, because all the techniques that we use to think inside the box, you've already figured out. So you're going to get bored with it. And that's challenging for teachers, because most teachers have to teach from a curriculum that they don't define themselves. And they're kind of bound by that. But the creative ones, your chemistry teacher, I think, is one of the creative ones, where he can react on the fly to how the kids are learning. And he can be a little more adaptive. Not everybody's a good teacher like that.
Yep.
So you kind of have to take it with a grain of salt. We're going to take our second break here. And when we come back, we're going to talk about the common types of unhealthy teen challenges. We'll be right back.
Insights into Entertainment, a podcast series taking a deeper look into entertainment and media. Our husband and wife team of pop culture fanatics are exploring all things from music and movies to television and fandom. We'll look at the interesting and obscure entertainment news of the week. We'll talk about theme park and pop culture news. We'll give you the latest and greatest on pop culture conventions. We'll give you a deep dive into Disney, Star Wars, and much more. Check out our video episodes at youtube.com/insightsintothings. Our audio episodes at podcast.insightsintoentertainment.com, or check us out on the web at insightsintothings.com.
Welcome back to Insights into Teens. Today we're talking about the importance of being challenged. And now we're going to talk about common types of unhealthy teen challenges. While the pursuit of challenges is a natural aspect of development, the absence of constructive challenges can lead to the adoption of risky actions with potentially harmful consequences. Here are 5 primary categories of these risky actions, shedding light on the importance of fostering healthy challenges for adolescents' well-being.
The first we're going to talk about is violence or injury. The first category of risky actions pertains to behaviors that may lead to violence or injury, not industry. This encompasses actions such as physical altercations, bullying, weapon possession, self-harm, and the contemplation or attempt of suicide. Adolescents who lack appropriate channels for challenge and self-expression may resort to these behaviors as a misguided way of asserting control, seeking attention, or coping with emotional distress.
The second is unsafe sexual behavior. The second category involves unsafe sexual behaviors, which encompasses actions such as engaging in sexual activity sexual activity at an early age, foregoing protection during intercourse, and neglecting to undergo testing for sexually transmitted diseases. Additionally, the consumption of alcohol or drugs before engaging in sexual activity heightens the risk associated with these behaviors. Unhealthy challenges in this context can stem from societal pressures, lack of comprehensive sex education, and limited awareness to potential consequences.
Alcohol, drugs, and tobacco use are another. Third category encompasses a range of behaviors from alcohol consumption in any quantity to binge drinking, prescription or illegal drug use, as well as smoking cigarettes or using chewing tobacco. Adolescents may gravitate toward these substances as a result of peer influence, curiosity, or as a means of escape from stressors. The absence of meaningful challenges may contribute to the allure of such behaviors as a form of experimentation.
The fourth category pertains to unsafe driving or riding behaviors. This encompasses actions like texting while driving, driving under the influence of substances, failing to wear seatbelts, or being in a vehicle with an impaired driver. Similarly, riding a bike under the influence or without proper safety gear falls within this category. The lack of constructive challenges can prompt adolescents to engage in these hazardous actions as a way of seeking excitement or asserting independence.
The final category concerns poor self-care behaviors. This involves inadequate attention to physical and mental well-being, including unhealthy eating habits, insufficient sleep, sedentary lifestyles, and excessive screen time on social media and electronic devices. The absence of positive challenges and productive outlets may lead adolescents to neglect self-care, resulting in various health and emotional issues.
The innate drive of adolescents to seek challenges and take risks is a fundamental aspect of their developmental journey. However, when constructive challenges are lacking, adolescents may resort to unhealthy behaviors. Recognizing the correlation between the absence of healthy challenges and the adoption of risky actions is crucial in shaping interventions and programs that foster a balanced and constructive adolescent experience. By providing opportunities for positive challenges, society can contribute to the cultivation of responsible decision-making and the overall well-being of teenagers.
So, what role do you think the absence of meaningful challenges plays in teenagers' decisions to experiment with substances like alcohol and tobacco?
Well, we actually recently did some drug projects in health when it came to like you pick a substance, you research it, and you talk about the dangers and why you shouldn't be using it and so forth. And one of the categories we could talk about or topics related to a drug is who uses it and why. And adolescents, like in a lot of the substances, like adolescents would use them and they were like one of the target demographics for it. And I feel like because they would have like either they just wouldn't have healthy or had the absence of healthy challenges, it would pretty much like they would end up resorting to such substances as either a means of escape, as a way of like just feeling like they were like in forms of like empowerment, because again, like drugs kind of affect you mentally and physically, and a lot of teens would probably use that in the sense of like, oh, I don't feel great right now, maybe I'll take this and it'll make me feel better, or it'll alter their perception of reality to make it seem better than it actually is.
That's a very good point. Very well thought out. So there are healthy challenges for teens as well. The journey of adolescence is marked by a crucial need for healthy challenges to foster growth, with parents holding a pivotal role in guiding their teenagers towards constructive avenues that expand their horizons. A range of options exist for parents to facilitate these beneficial challenges.
One is outdoor adventure therapy. Encompassing activities such as rock climbing, kayaking, and ropes courses, these experiences are designed to cultivate problem solving skills and self reliance, leading to enhanced self esteem and stronger interpersonal connections.
Engagement in sports. The realm of sports provides teenagers with an environment to test their physical and mental limits. Within a supportive framework, they can explore their capabilities and extend them to new boundaries.
Engaging in creative endeavors like art, theater, and stand up comedy presents teenagers with meaningful challenges. These challenges can gain prominence when they present their creative work to an audience, encouraging confidence and personal growth.
Activities such as indoor rock climbing, roller coaster rides, and visits to theme parks offer teenagers a controlled outlet for their innate desire for excitement and thrill seeking.
Venturing into uncharted territories by learning new skills through lessons or partaking in family activities like river rafting opens avenues for teens to challenge themselves while enjoying familial support.
While encouraging healthy eating habits is beneficial, parents must tread carefully to prevent it from evolving into disordered eating behaviors, especially among those susceptible to eating disorders.
Engaging in roles like camp counselors, club memberships, or after school classics, not classics.
The old
sorry.
after school classics, Tom and Jerry,
Engaging in roles like camp counselors, club memberships, or after school classes exposes teenagers to unfamiliar environments, encouraging them to transcend their comfort zones.
And finally, we have embarking on travel adventures, which you'll be going on in the not too distant future. The prospect of studying abroad or participating in group trips introduces teens to novel challenges and risks, enriching their growth through diverse experiences.
Teenagers are inherently inclined to seek challenges that stretch their boundaries and offer excitement. Parental guidance is paramount in channeling this natural inclination toward healthy challenges that facilitate growth while mitigating potential risks. By providing platforms for outdoor exploit, participation in sport, creative expression, controlled excitement, skill acquisition, balanced nutrition, social engagement, and exploration through travel, parents can empower their teenagers to embark on a journey of personal development and self empowerment.
So, how can parents support their teenagers in exploring new activities and venturing into unfamiliar territories while ensuring a balance between challenging experiences and safety?
Well, I think the idea is one of the main ones is finding a good balance between how involved the parent is, because you don't want to completely hover over your kid the entire time and dictate what exactly they're going to be challenged with, or tell them how to face the challenges on their own, or just give them too many pointers and so forth. But you also don't want to completely throw them into a challenging situation without any sort of guidance, because that's a good way for them to engage in more dangerous activities as a result without, the proper guidance and way to at least have a little bit of a steering toward the right path.
Now, do you think that Mommy and I provide these challenges, these constructive challenges, to you in an appropriate manner and sufficient volume to keep you challenged? Do we not challenge you enough? Are we challenging you too much? What are your thoughts on that?
I feel like you guys, it's not an often sort of thing, but you guys definitely try to provide challenges for me. I either challenge myself more than you guys do, or I refuse to challenge myself. It's an interesting streak. Occasionally you guys will give me certain challenges to overcome, and most of the time I'm fine with that. Most of my challenges and not challenging myself can usually come from myself.
See, and in my experience, there's really two types of challenges that you tend to face. Either it's a creative, fun, artistic, expressive type of challenge, like making a picture for a special occasion or something like that, and you excel at those. Then there's the uncomfortable challenges where we try to kind of get you to step outside your boundaries, your comfort zones a little bit and expand your boundaries. And those, like driving, we try to make you drive as often as we can because I think it's an important learned skill that you should have. And there's a lot more resistance from you for these things. Do you agree with that? Do you think that there's challenges that you are always going to be resistant to unless it's kind of forced down your throat? And do you think there's certain challenges that if you enjoy them, they're not really challenges? That's kind of the concern that I have with the ones that you do enjoy doing. I don't think they're challenges to you at that point.
I mean, that is kind of how it goes, I guess. I really have nothing much to say on that. Yes, I am, like I kind of mentioned before, I'm not really one that likes being challenged. Like, in certain instances, I feel fine being challenged, and others, it's not fun and I don't like it.
Right. Well, and that's like for Mommy and I, the challenge to us, not to keep using the word challenge, but I will. It's finding out, one, how to challenge you in a way that you'll be accepting of it. And two, finding a challenge for you that you can get something out of. Like if I ask you to draw me a picture and you do it in your regular style, you're not getting anything out of that. But if I come to you and I say, I need you to draw me a picture in this style, and it's a style you've never done before, you're very receptive to that. You'll accept a challenge that pushes your artistic boundaries. But if it's your comfort boundaries, you tend not to want to engage in those challenges. And I think maybe Mommy and I need to challenge those comfort boundaries, but in a less aggressive way, and maybe introduce you to expanding those boundaries in a more gradual way. Do you think something like that would be more effective?
I mean, maybe. I don't really have.
You don't seem very enthusiastic.
I'm not
about
really
that
enthusiastic.
either.
I appreciate my comfort zone. Thank you very much. I understand that if you don't challenge me, then I'll probably just be forced into it, and then I won't have anything. I won't have any way of how to manage it. But even then, it's like I have my comfort zone right now, and I still don't want to leave it.
Well, and nobody wants to leave their comfort zone. That's why it's a comfort zone. But our comfort zones tend to silo us. They pigeonhole us. We can't really grow when we're always staying in our comfort zone. And I don't want to rip you out of that comfort zone and throw you into an uncomfortable situation. What I'd much rather do is kind of slowly and gradually increase the discomfort in your comfort zone so you can learn to expand a little bit more. And I think we may have not have found that scenario just yet. I think that's probably where we're working right now. But, you certainly do accept the challenges that we send to you. I don't think there's much of a problem there. That's about all we have. We're going to take a quick break, come back, and we'll get your closing thoughts and finish up the podcast. We'll be right back.
All right, so to everyone out there, I just wanted to mention that challenges are a part of life, and it's not really something we can entirely avoid. There can be very positive challenges that can help us grow as people and expand our horizons. But then if we don't have those positive challenges, we can usually take up more negative challenges and risks that can harm us more than they can help us. So much like everything with life, you kind of have to find a good balance between both of them, and hopefully you'll be able to grow as a person as you discover it.
All right. Sage advice, as always. I think we're going to skip the plugs to the end here, and we're getting kind of redundant with those, and say that's it. Another one in the books.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Insightful podcasts by informative hosts. Insights into Things, a podcast network. Welcome to Insights into Tomorrow, where we take a deeper look into how the issues of today will impact the world of tomorrow. From politics and world news to media and technology, we discuss how today's headlines are becoming tomorrow's reality.
Welcome to Insights into Tomorrow, episode 21. Is the Supreme Court broken? I'm your host, Joseph Whalen, and my co-host, Sam Whalen.
Hey everybody, how's it going?
How you doing today, Sam?
Doing okay, excited. We're getting back into the flow. This is like our third episode in a couple months?
Something like that, yeah.
Back on a roll.
Yeah, well, at least now when we do plugs on our other shows, I don't have Madison saying, well, you're not quite monthly podcast, that you guys don't do monthly anymore, so at least now we're getting back into the flow of things. So today we're going to be talking about whether or not the Supreme Court is broken, with a series of landmark rulings from the Supreme Court, some of which were precedent-breaking, almost all in support of the current conservative agenda. Is the Supreme Court broken? Are 9 unelected justices, 3 of which were handpicked by probably the most controversial president in American history, dictating the direction of a government that is supposed to be a republic of the people? Well, that's what we're going to be discussing today on this episode of Insights into Tomorrow. But before we do that, I would like to take a moment to invite our listening and viewing audience to subscribe to the podcast. You can find audio versions of this podcast listed as Insights into Tomorrow. You can find video versions and audio versions of all the network's podcasts listed as Insights into Things. And we're available on Pandora, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, Spotify, any place you can get a podcast these days.
Rest in peace, Stitcher. They're shutting down.
Are they? I hadn't heard that. Oh, I got to take those off the list then.
Yeah.
Wow, they've been around a long time, too.
I used to use Stitcher, and then they changed their interface, and it was terrible, and then I stopped using Stitcher, and I think a lot of other people did, too.
Apparently a lot of other people did, too. You can also email us or reach out to us. Our email is comments@insightsintothings.com. We are on Twitter at insights_things, or you can get links to all those and more on our official website at www.insightsintothings.com. Are we ready?
Let's get into it.
Here we go. So our first topic comes from New York Times, and they tell us that the recent Supreme Court term concluded with a series of 6-3 decisions divided along partisan lines, with the court's 6 Republican appointees in the majority. Those rulings on affirmative action, student loans, and gay rights were reminiscent of the transformative conservative decisions issued last June on abortion, guns, religion, and climate change. Is the Supreme Court in crisis? And if so, how could it be fixed? Complaints by the Supreme Court have cropped up throughout American history, but they've taken on renewed urgency since President Biden's inauguration. In the past, some of these criticisms have come from the left, such as when Franklin Roosevelt threatened to, quote, pack the courts to protect New Deal legislation. Others emerged from the right, like anger aimed at the, quote, activist bench that decided Roe v. Wade in 1973. But more recently, Democrats, stung by the Republican Senate majority's refusal to hold hearings on President Barack Obama's nominee Merrick Garland in 2016 and its replacement of Ruth Bader Ginsburg with Amy Coney Barrett just weeks before the 2020 presidential election, have reinvigorated calls for reform.
So is there a problem? Is there a problem with the nation's highest court? The appointment process has become more politicized than ever, like most things in this country, leading to dogmatic justices and a court whose legitimacy among the public could be in danger. In the past, it had not been the case that the public could look at these 9 people and see them projecting the ideological preferences of the political party that brought them to the bench. After Brown versus Board of Education, a case could be made that something changed in the American psyche. The idea that the court had, quote, final interpretive authority had been solidified in the public mind, and the, quote, perceived power of the Supreme Court in popular political culture vastly expanded. This shifted the debate to how to interpret the Constitution, which created an even bigger incentive for presidents to vet and select judicial candidates who would faithfully execute their agenda. So because of that, leaders began to choose nominees who were young enough to influence decision-making for decades after that president had left office. So you're seeing, they'll appoint a judge, but even after they've left the office, we're still seeing the ramifications of that appointment years after the fact. One effect we have today are judicial amendments to the Constitution, which with no ready means to overturn them. Of course, short of Congress actually cooperating to add new amendments to the Constitution that the justices would have to consider, of course. So, we're looking at what all this means, right? These judges have a ton of power, and, with this 6-3 Republican majority, how is that affecting a lot of these decisions?
Yeah, and without going into a civics lesson here, the purpose of a 3-part government with an executive, a judicial, and a legislative branch was to have separation of power. Mm-hmm. And at no point in time when that form of government was created was the intent to have Congress actually writing laws. So the problem that we run into now is that because Congress can literally interpret what the Constitution says, they can tell you now what those laws are. So even if a law says one thing, the Supreme Court can come in and rule against how it's actually written. And I'll give you an example. One of the things that you hear a lot about in the news is your Second Amendment right to bear arms. Well, one of the things that a lot of people who talk about this subject fail to mention is that in the Constitution, it says the right to bear arms is tied directly to militia. Mm-hmm. And the Supreme Court simply interpreted that as to not be the case anymore. And they decided that everyone should be able to bear arms, whether you're with a militia. Now, if you look at the history of militias, local militias, which everyone remembers, the Minutemen and all that stuff that were the militia, they were evolved through legislative processes into what is today the modern National Guard. So when we say militia today, that equivalent is National Guard. Now, you can make a case that says only the National Guard, who are citizen soldiers, should have the right to bear arms, and it would make sense. But the court didn't interpret it that way, and the court says everyone should have the ability to bear arms.
Right.
We're seeing this now, and one of the things that we're seeing now is that the decisions that are being made along partisan lines. And the entire concept of the Supreme Court is that they're supposed to be impartial. They're appointed. They're not elected. Mm-hmm. And they could be appointed by either party, of which parties themselves technically are unconstitutional, since there's no concept of political parties in the Constitution that you can make an argument for right there. But the problem that we're running into now is you've got people that are on the court that are not necessarily making impartial decisions from what people are saying. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's been kind of tough to watch, honestly. Especially when you think about how you would like things to work we're not necessarily a straight up democracy. We're a republic, or a democratic republic, right?
Federal republic.
Yeah. But in a certain extent, you would want the will of the people to be reflected by the people that are leading us. And I don't really think that's the case necessarily, especially when we are going to look at a lot of these rulings today. A lot of people don't agree with these rulings, but there really is nothing we can do about it because they're the Supreme Court and they hold all the power when it comes to these things. And especially when you've got the conservative majority, obviously a conservative agenda is going to be more pushed, than the other side of things. And there's just no getting around that.
Well, and the one point the article makes is that the only thing that Congress can do to take back the power that the people elected into them would be to come up with amendments to the Constitution. So the Supreme Court would then have to consider these amendments. Of course, they could rule any way they wanted on those amendments. But the problem you run into now is that the political environment is so contested, there's no way you're going to get both Republicans and Democrats to agree enough to get any kind of amendment passed. And to be honest with you, with the politicians we have today, I think the last thing this country needs is people starting to write amendments to the Constitution.
Yeah, it's a slippery slope.
So how do we get that power back into the hands of the people?
Oh, you're asking me? I have no idea. I mean, I legitimately have no idea because, like we talked about, these folks aren't elected; they're appointed. So I guess it would be voting for the political candidates that you think would appoint the judges you want. But even then, there's no guarantee that's going to happen. I don't know if there's a legal way to to like contest it. I don't think there is, right? It's the Supreme Court. I mean, you always go to that higher power. The highest power for law is the Supreme Court, right? So maybe at the state level.
Theoretically, the only thing that really could be done would be what the Republicans were concerned the Biden administration was going to do, and that is pack the courts. Mm-hmm. So there's nothing constitutionally that says the court is limited to 9 justices. We've had more in the past. So the president could call for the expansion of the Supreme Court, add, say, 3 additional people to the Supreme Court, appoint 3 Democrats, so you'd have
6 and 6.
6 and 6 at that point in time, and try to bring some balance back to it. That's feasible, and that's something that's well within his power, but the punishment of the attacks that he would get for packing the court like that from the Republicans, he'll be impeached within a week once he even mentions that.
But wouldn't you want it to be balanced? Is that not, like, wouldn't you want enough?
I would, as a citizen, I would.
But I guess if you want...
As a Republican, right, you don't when you have the power.
Yeah.
Because, if you look at history, whenever government power has been balanced, where the executive is one party and the legislature is another party,
nothing gets done.
Nothing gets done.
Yeah.
And really, that's really the best scenario that we have at this point in time is gridlock. Because if neither side can get anything done, they can't screw things up any more than they already have.
Yep. Or further assert their own agenda and get more power for themselves.
That's it. And the problem that you have right now is that when you can appoint members to the Supreme Court that will carry out your agenda and not be impartial, that is packing the court, really.
Right.
And they did exactly that under Trump, where they rushed through the last appointment after Ginsburg died.
Yep.
And had she held out, and I don't mean to make light of this, but had she held out, because I think she was in a state of coma at the time, and they had just kept her on life support, they couldn't have filled that seat until after the election. And you would have had a more balanced, it still would have been imbalanced, but you would have had a more balanced court at that time. So yeah. I think the problem we have is the process by which justices are appointed is now ripe with corruption, and it has become a political process. And I think that the integrity of the Supreme Court has deteriorated to the point that you've got Supreme Court justices now that are under investigation for corruption themselves, where you've got Clarence Thomas, who's under investigation for taking undeclared presents or undeclared gifts, basically bribes,
right,
from a very prominent, very well-known Republican supporter that he was supposed to declare and didn't. And when you've got that kind of suspicion on your Supreme Court, it's really hard to take them seriously as being a Supreme Court at that point.
Yeah, because ideally, at the end of the day, we all know politicians are corrupt, right? I mean, everybody knows that. But ideally, you would want the last line of defense to be the Supreme Court, to be impartial, to be the one thing you can count on to kind of right the ship, but that is not the case anymore. And maybe it hasn't been for a while.
No, you're absolutely right. And I think that's the problem we're at. That's the situation we're in now, where they were always the sanity check. They were always the ones that came in impartially. Not always. I mean, there was partiality in there for years, but they were the element of government that would come in that were the babysitters, that would, push the two sides apart and say, all right, let's look at this. Let's look at what's legally precedent. Let's look at what's best for the country, and let's do the right thing. And you're just not getting that referee from them now.
Yep.
So I think we're going to take our first break, and when we come back, we're going to take a look at some of the more impactful decisions from the most recent term of the court. We'll be right back. For over 7 years, the Second Sith Empire has been the premier community guild in the online game Star Wars: The Old Republic. With hundreds of friendly and helpful active members, a weekly schedule of nightly events, annual guild meet and greets, and an active community both on the web and on Discord. The Second Sith Empire is more than your typical gaming group. We're family. Join us on the Starforge server for nightly events such as operations, flashpoints, world boss hunts, Star Wars trivia, guild lottery, and much more. Visit us on the web today at www.thesecondsithempire.com.
Welcome back, everyone, to Insights into Tomorrow. Today we are discussing the Supreme Court and some of their recent decisions. So the first thing we're going to cover is the ruling on affirmative action. The Supreme Court effectively gutted affirmative action, ending race-conscious admissions. In a historic decision, the U.S. Supreme Court recently, like we just said, ended race-conscious admission programs in colleges and universities across the country. In a decision divided along ideological lines, the 6 conservative justices, supermajority, that's a cool word, maybe not in practice, but it's a cool word, invalidated admission programs at Harvard and the University of North Carolina. The decision reverses decades of precedent upheld over the years by narrow Supreme Court majorities that included Republican-appointed justices. It also ends the ability of colleges and universities, public and private, to do what most say they still need to do, and that's consider race as one of the many factors in deciding which of the qualified applicants is to be admitted. So that's the first thing we're covering. This is a pretty big deal, especially for those that are affected by it. And it was really that public and private thing that I really latched onto, that it's everywhere. You think of the big schools, like it mentions Harvard and North Carolina, but this is going to affect a lot more than just them.
Yeah, and there's, with all things, there's 2 sides to every story here. And really what we're looking at here is you've got one side that basically says that you can't, by bringing race in and giving preferential treatment to one race over another is discrimination. So you can't do that. When the point of doing that was because discrimination existed already.
Right.
And you were getting preferential treatment to one race over another. So they legislatively forced you to, if not change that practice, then to at least adhere to certain percentages, certain quotas that you had to have. And the problem that you run into here is that you're saying, okay, let's do it away with discrimination administratively. Well, then, in a perfect world, that works. You can do that. But we don't live in a perfect world, because when you do away with administrative discrimination, you still have endemic
societal
yeah. discrimination that's going to take over in that place.
And that's kind of the thing, that when people argue that, they argue the first point that you said of, oh, well, it's discriminatory to have affirmative action. But then people forget that, like, racism exists. And, like,
Right.
That's why it had to be, like, forced in the first place, is because if we make it laissez-faire, it doesn't work. It's not equal, and it needs to be mandated to make it well, I guess it's not equal, but you know what I mean, to give those people the opportunity that they otherwise probably would not be afforded and now will not be afforded.
Well, and I think that was what the original point of this legislation was. It was to force you to make it even. But in trying to get to that point, you simply instituted a different form of discrimination. So you're treating the symptom, not the problem. Mm-hmm. The problem really is the discrimination. And until human beings can evolve to the point that they don't discriminate, you're not gonna have that happy balance. And that's kind of what the majority have argued. The 6-3 majority, conservative majority in the court, argued, quote, many universities have for too long concluded, wrongly, that the touchstone of an individual's identity is not challenges bested, skills built, or lessons learned, but the color of their skin. Our constitutional history does not tolerate that choice. Now, I take exception to that one to begin with there, because our Constitution declares that all men are created equal. And when it was written, they knew all men weren't created equal, because also in the Constitution, 3/5, every African American who was in the country was counted as 3/5 of a person. So the hypocrisy in the Constitution itself tells me that we don't have a constitutional history that says this is intolerant.
Yeah.
As he has done before, Justice Thomas, the second black justice appointed to the court, reiterated his long-held view that affirmative action imposes a stigma on minorities. Now, this I think he has a point with. I don't think the way he puts it here has a point. He says, quote, while I'm painfully aware of the social and economic ravages which have befallen my race and all who suffer discrimination, I hold our enduring hope that this country will live up to its principles that all men are created equal, all equal citizens, and all must be treated equally before the law. Now, I think he's smart enough to know that that's not how the world is right now.
No, that's
The fact that he makes a statement like this is naive, and it's insulting, really.
Yeah, because it puts the ball in our court of like, hey, man, we got rid of it. You guys got to be better.
Right.
It's like, no, the Supreme Court exists to do that. It is your job, and more so part than like every citizen, to uphold these values and to fight for this kind of equality that you're talking about here. But you're not doing that. You're doing the opposite of that. And then you're basically washing your hands of it and saying, well, hey, we live in a society. You know what I mean? Like,
right. Now, to Thomas's point, I can understand the rationale that by holding African Americans to a lower standard, that you're imposing a stigma on them. And really, if it was me, I would be insulted. So really what we're talking about here is, if you have two people who are one white, one black, they both apply for school, you have to take, under normal circumstances, you would take the person who's the most qualified, and that qualification would be equally measured. But instead, what we're talking about here is somebody who may need a 3.5 grade point average if they were Caucasian to get in, an African American may only need a 3.25. And Thomas's point is, by holding them to that lower standard, you're basically telling them that they're not good enough. So there's a logic to it, but the way that he uses that logic is so distorted and so tone deaf to the spirit of this legislation, because what's happening is, in reality, you're saying, reality is saying, if the Caucasian has a 3.5 and the African American has a 3.5, we're going to let the Caucasian guy in because he's not black. And that's what reality is.
Yeah.
And Thomas fails to address that with his stigma argument. So Chief Justice Roberts goes on, and for his part, pointed out the court's 2003 decision reaffirming the constitutionality of affirmative action programs, noting that Justice Sandra Day O'Connor, writing for the court at the time, had suggested that there would have to be an end at some point in the future. And Roberts declares that time is now. And I think the problem is, it hasn't. Human beings...
It's only gotten worse.
Not even human beings. Americans have not gotten to the point that they're mature enough to assume, to understand that all men are created equal. With the amount of legislation that's happening today that is discriminatory, that is holding African Americans down, that's holding Asian Americans down, the hatred that is an upswelling of political force in this country today is a clear indicator that not only are we not ready, we're not moving in the right direction, we're sliding backwards from where we need to be.
Yeah, and I think that's going to be something we say a lot on this episode. It feels like we're regressing.
Yeah,
and I think it is absurd to assume that the time is now is when we need to end affirmative action. If anything, we might need to go the other way with it to make it more affirmative, right? Because things seem to be only getting worse, and that's going to be a common theme here. We also have the opposing view, and this is from Justice Sonia Sotomayor. She said that the court subverts the constitutional guarantee of equal protection by further entrenching racial inequality in education, the very foundation of our democratic government and pluralistic society. Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson, the court's first black female justice, also chimed in saying, with Let Them Eat Cake obliviousness today, the majority pulls the ripcord and announces colorblindness for all by legal fiat. Sorry. When you're quoting Supreme Court justices, they're much smarter than I am. But deeming race irrelevant in law does not make it so in life, which is exactly what we just talked about. Just because you say it's that idea of like a post-racial America, right? Like we elected Obama, racism's over. It's like, no, it's not.
Right.
And that is clearly being reflected here as well.
Yeah, no, and the problem that we run into here is that what the majority are arguing here is they're arguing the point of a fiction, that in a perfect world, we shouldn't need this legislation. And they're right. In a perfect world, we shouldn't. The world we live in is far from perfect.
Yeah.
And this happened to be a stopgap measure to make things better. Nothing else has happened in this world to make that situation better. Mm-hmm. If anything, that situation's gotten worse. So by taking away some of the safeties that you had in place to try to provide legal protections for people, you're doing your part. You're being part of the problem, not part of the solution at that point.
Yeah, why did they do this? just to have a rule? What was the motivation behind it? I don't even like.
Well, the motivation is what motivates conservatives to want to do things like this.
Yeah, I guess just further the agenda, right?
Right. They're pushing an agenda which they shouldn't be pushing an agenda. They should be looking at each and every case on a standalone basis and making educated, objective decisions. They should not be influenced by party politics, and that's exactly what's happening.
Yeah, I wonder if we'd have as harsh criticism if it was the other side, right? But I also think the liberal agenda or Democratic agenda is not as aggressive as the conservative agenda, and not as
which by its definition doesn't make sense.
Right.
That your conservatives are the more aggressive.
And that you're supposed to not like big government, right?
Exactly.
And this is the opposite of that. This is the biggest government.
Well, you could argue that this is a limitation of government because it's government making impositions over the schools. And they're saying, well, government shouldn't do that anymore. The schools need to regulate themselves.
I more so meant the 6-3 majority basically being able to do whatever it wants without being stopped.
Yeah, no, I agree. But I think
I see what you mean, though.
The motivation that they have at this point in time is, we're a progressive Supreme Court now. We're going to do things right the way that we see it. We're going to make the changes that should have been made years ago, and they're going to undo what's being undone. And there's a couple of problems with that. One, you're undoing existing precedent. So by every time you undo a precedent, like they did in the last session when they overruled Roe versus Wade, every time you overrule a Supreme Court precedent, you delegitimize the Supreme Court.
Nope.
The whole point of the Supreme Court
It's the word. It's final.
is it's supreme.
Right.
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 So when the Supreme Court can override the Supreme Court, then what the Supreme Court today, who's overriding that, says can be overridden.
Who watches the Watchmen? You know.
Right. So they're delegitimizing the Supreme Court. So that's probably one of the biggest problems that you run into. The other problem is the things that haven't been ruled on, that really are important stuff that need to be ruled on, are being pushed to the side so that they can use this agenda that they have to rewrite the rules that have already been written. So you're hurting the country. You know, be a part of the solution, not a part of the problem.
And you know, you talk about the correcting itself. So the Supreme Court overriding itself. It's like it really does. I didn't even think about that until just now. It really does have a very harmful effect because that basically could eliminate precedent in general. Because
Absolutely.
if they rule on now and then in 10 years there's different judges and they just are like, no, that's not. We're just gonna get rid of that. It's like, well, then what was even the point of doing it in the first place? It's like it's all temporary until you know you have a majority the other way that comes in and just does everything the other way. It does really delegitimize the whole process.
And that's what we've seen with political parties as well. One political party will come in and they'll be in power for 4 years, 6 years, 8 years, whatever, you know, they control a legislative and executive, and they'll push their agenda. And the other side will fight them tooth and nail. Then they'll switch powers and the balance changes. And then the other guys are fighting and nothing gets done. Nothing substantial gets done. We don't get universal health care. We don't get tax reform. We don't get any of the things that the country needs because they spend all the time fighting. Now, we expect that from our politicians. We don't expect that from our Supreme Court. We deserve better from our Supreme Court because these are appointed positions. They don't have to campaign. They don't have to get elected. They're not chosen by the people. They're handpicked, they're cherry-picked by the president, and it's for life. And they need to be held. They're not even held to the same standards, the same moral and ethical standards that lower courts are held to. There's no ethical board that oversees the Supreme Court. You would think instead of being the exception to the rule, the Supreme Court should be the precedent to the rule. They should be the ones that are under the most scrutiny. Their taxes should be looked at on a regular basis. Their gifts that they receive, their rulings everything should be looked at. Their political affiliations, the friends that they take their vacation trips with, all of that stuff should be gone over with a fine-tooth comb on a constant basis because of the position they're in and the power that they possess.
Yeah.
It's dangerous that it's not. And it's dangerous that these people can possess more power than the elected officials in this country. That's really where the problem is. And it has a broader impact. You know, this recent decision is likely to cause ripples throughout the country. And not just in higher education, but in selective primary and secondary schools. Ultimately, effects will be felt in every aspect of the nation's economic, educational, and social life. From the Rooney Rule that requires a minority applicant to be considered in all NFL coaching hiring decisions, to employment and promotion decisions, the diversity, equity, and inclusion programs in schools and workplaces, and much more. The Supreme Court literally just said discrimination is legal.
Yeah.
That's what this decision says. And that is exceedingly dangerous for this country.
And I really think it is naive too, because how are you able to exist, especially as a Supreme Court justice, where you've been dealing with law your entire life? Surely you'd be able to see that people are not treated equally, right? These things, you know, if you let things run themselves, they will not run well, right? Like, it's not going to just fix itself. It's not going to be equal if you let people do it, because like we talked about at the top of this break, affirmative action was put in the first place because it wasn't equal. So it's like, do you think that's just going to magically fix itself, especially now when, you know, hate crimes are on the rise and discrimination's worse than it has been in a very long time? And, you know, but then again, maybe that's all part of the plan.
Well, and I'll be the first one to say, you know, I watched the the hearings when Clarence Thomas was up for Supreme Court nominations, and the questions that he was asked and how racially biased the people that were questioning him from the other side were, and that was Democrats questioning him at the time. It was brutal. And that was a small fraction of what he's had to put up with his whole life. Because he's a man who has set precedent his entire life with his career being African American, doing the things he did. You would think going through that and then making the statements that he said on this ruling, they were coming from two completely different people.
Yeah, like how do you even believe that when he says that?
Right.
Like,
It's astonishing what he's saying now and what he's been through in his life.
yeah.
So
And that was point number 1.
Yeah.
We've got 2 more to do.
that was rough. We're going to take another quick break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about something that might be a little closer to you, and that is the student loan forgiveness plan being rejected. We'll be right back.
Insights into Entertainment, a podcast series taking a deeper look into entertainment and media. Our husband and wife team of pop culture fanatics are exploring all things from music and movies to television and fandom. We'll look at the interesting and obscure entertainment news of the week. We'll talk about theme park and pop culture news. We'll give you the latest and greatest on pop culture conventions. We'll give you a deep dive into Disney, Star Wars, and much more. Check out our video episodes at youtube.com/insightsintothings. Our audio episodes at podcast.insightsintoentertainment.com, or check us out on the web at insightsintothings.com.
Welcome back, everyone, to Insights into Tomorrow. We are continuing our discussion on the Supreme Court's recent rulings. So in this segment, we're going to talk about the rejection of the student loan forgiveness plan. The Supreme Court effectively killed President Joe Biden's $400 billion plan to cancel or reduce federal student loan debts for millions of Americans. The 6-3 decision, we've heard that number a lot, with conservative justices in the majority, said the Biden administration overstepped its authority with the plan, and it left borrowers on the hook for repayments that are expected to resume in the fall. The court held that the administration needed Congress's endorsement before undertaking so costly a program. The majority rejected arguments that a bipartisan 2003 law dealing with national emergencies, known as the HEROES Act, gave Biden the power he claimed.
The president said he would work toward a new path for student debt relief using the Higher Education Act, which he called, quote, the best path that remains to provide as many borrowers as possible with debt relief. He also moved to create a, quote, on-ramp that would help ease the risk of default for students who fail to make payments when the current pause ends. Biden blamed Republican officials. Again, it's always the other guy's fault. Biden blamed Republican officials for causing the dispute that led to Friday's ruling, saying, quote, they had no problem with billions in pandemic relief loans to businesses, and those loans were forgiven. But when it came to providing relief for millions of hardworking Americans, they did everything in their power to stop it.
That's actually a pretty good quote from Biden.
Yeah.
I feel like we don't get a lot of those.
I'm sure it was written and somebody else wrote it.
Loan repayments will resume in October. Can't wait for that. Although interest will begin accruing in September. The interest is where they get you, by the way. The Education Department has announced payments have been on hold since the start of the coronavirus pandemic more than 3 years ago. Oh my God, where does the time go? The forgiveness program would have canceled $10,000 in student loan debt for those making less than $125,000 or households with less than $250,000 in income. 26 million people had applied for relief, including me, and 43 million would have been eligible, maybe me, the administration said. The cost was estimated at $400 billion over 30 years. Yeah, this is a heartbreaker. Let's really hoping this will go through. Obviously, I'm biased. I have student loan debt. And this $10,000 would have been a decent chunk of my loans that would have really helped me out. Now, I understand. I hear the argument, right? People are saying, well, you have to work to pay off your loans. But if you go watch, and I don't remember what episode it was, the episode where we talked about student debt, we talk about how the cost of college has gone up astronomically. So it's not as simple as just saying, oh, you have to work harder, right? Like, and this usually comes from the older generation of telling people my age, well, you just have to work hard. You have to, you need to stop buying your avocado toast so you can afford to buy a house one day, when it's really not that simple. Especially when interest, like I mentioned, the interest is where they're going to get you, because as the interest compounds and compounds on itself, I've heard so many stories of people that have been paying their loans for like 30 years and they still owe more than when they started because of the interest.
Yeah, and I think, again, this is another one of those situations where the proposed solution is treating the symptoms, not the problem. I totally agree that $10,000 off your loan would be really nice. But the problem isn't how much you borrowed. The problem is how student loans are structured. And in the episode that we had talked about student loan, the fact that it's predatory, number one, where these banks are coming after students knowing what the cost of college is and the potential for getting paid back over time, the banks are willing to wait for it, especially when they know they're going to take your debt and they're going to sell it to other companies and make money that way. And then these companies that sell it then get investors to invest in it. And the last thing these investors want you to do is pay your loan off. Yep. What they want you to do is keep paying your interest, because that's how they get their money. The problem isn't necessarily students that borrow money to go to college. Part of the problem definitely is the cost of college, which has gone up unjustifiably. The other problem is these aren't traditional loans. These are credit cards, basically. If you went out and you bought a house, say you bought a house, we'll just use round numbers. You bought a house for $100,000 and you get 10% interest, which is like credit card interest on a house, by the way. But we're just doing it to illustrate.
Economics are hard.
So at the end of 30 years, you would have paid $10,000 in interest on that house. So your house would have cost you $110,000. That's it. The amount of interest that you're going to pay on that house is calculated the day that you get your loan. And it's a fixed amount. They amortize it over the course of the loan. And for the first 15 years, the majority of what you pay is going towards interest on that house, so the bank gets their money back. The bank is guaranteed to get their money back. After 15 years, the majority of the money is principal on the loan until you pay the loan off. By the time you get to the last 5 years on the loan, you're paying almost nothing in interest because the interest has already been paid back. But it's a fixed amount. If they structured student loans, the $1,000 more the organization, right? They don't sell, lemonade. They don't have a lemonade stand somewhere where they're making money. The money comes from the taxpayers.
Right.
So their entire income is us. So if you're not paying your loan, someone's paying it, and it's the rest of the American taxpayer. And that's why it's very difficult to convince somebody who doesn't have student debt to pay for somebody who has student debt. What they should be doing is they should be changing the way the student loans are structured. They should be capping the interest payments on there. They should be capping how opportunistic these loans are.
And how easy they are to get.
Yes. If you did that, you could solve this problem. Until then, you're shining a turd here trying to make something pretty out of it.
Now, I will put on my tinfoil hat here. You mentioned that this really isn't fixing anything. But for people like me that are important for a Democratic president that may be running for re-election soon, this would be a great reason to get a vote for him, right?
Well, you are. And that's a good point. So he's buying your vote. That's really what this is. The problem is that the demographic that you are, the number of participating voters in that demographic are disproportionately smaller than the number of senior citizen voters, the ones who are going to be on the hook for paying that back. So that logic is valid, but the practice itself doesn't work because the numbers don't work out.
Yeah.
Because if you could get more people your age to get out and vote, it would work. But we can't. The voting percentage of people in your demographic is like 15% or something like that.
I guarantee it's going to be even lower.
Right. Where the voting percentage of people 65 and older is like 70%. So that's not going to work out in your favor, even if he is trying to buy your vote.
Yeah, you're not buying enough of the vote.
Right.
He
Right.
should repay, he should make it like an elder care bill or something.
Right. But if you fix the problem and you fixed how student loans were financed, it would work for because it won't cost the government anything at that point. You simply write legislation that says how you have to conduct your loans, and you then enforce that legislation. And people who don't abide by that legislation, you impose a fine on them, and the government has another source of income without paying for loans.
So why do we think what's stopping them from doing this restructuring? It seems pretty simple.
It is, but the problem is you have to get both parties to agree to it. And they can't agree to the color of the sky at this point.
Yeah, especially even if they want to, because it's from the other side, they're not going to do it.
Exactly. Joe Biden could propose world peace and right for the country and what's right for the citizens. They can't, because if it makes the other guy look good, then in turn it makes them look bad.
Right. When in reality it doesn't. It's we should all be in this together. We all live here.
Right.
But
I mean, you look at the parties now going into the primary, both parties are tearing at each other's throat, telling you why you shouldn't vote for the other guy of their own party.
Which is contributing to voter apathy, which is why people don't want to vote.
Exactly.
We'll make this another episode maybe, but I was always of the mind that you should always vote no matter what. And I'm really being convinced, maybe not. I don't know who we're going to have in the presidential election coming up, but it's going to be tough for me to pick somebody, right? And I know, we go with the old lesser two evil arguments, but they're both pretty bad, or they both probably will be pretty bad. And I don't know, like I said, we can make another episode, but it's the first time in my life.
And they're kind of locked in. There's a certain percentage of those. Then there's the kind of people who are people who hear one argument, don't thing. They're the uninformed voter. Then there's the informed voter. They're probably the smallest percentage out there. They're the ones the politicians are terrified of. Because if you're smart enough to go out and do your own research from multiple sources and draw your own conclusions, you terrify politicians. They want mindless lemmings out there that they can tell you who to vote for, and you'll just go do it. And if you vote along party lines, you're the ideal candidate. They don't have to say anything. They could go out there and kill people in the streets, and you'll still vote for them.
Yep.
That's what they hope for. And if you're informed, and the one thing that we try to do on all of our podcasts is to educate and inform people, enlighten people. Don't listen to what I'm telling you. Don't listen to what we say on the show. Go do your own research.
Yep.
If I'm wrong, come back and tell me that I'm wrong about something. I'm happy to hear that, and I'm willing to have my point of view changed if it's legitimate. But don't just vote. The politicians go out there, you have to vote. It's important. Go vote.
They guilt you. No.
Right. But, as a citizen, it's your job that's the one duty that you have is to vote. But what they're really saying is vote for me.
Right.
And voting is important because it's the only way that our kind of government continues to exist. So I totally advocate people vote. But when you're voting, if you're voting in your local election or your school board or something like that, understand the choice that you make affects you. You may not think who's in Congress affects you, but I'll guarantee you it does, because the amount of money you pay in taxes and the amount of money they take out of your pocket is something you can control by who you vote for. And if you vote somebody in this time and they don't do what you want, or you don't think that by the end of their term you're better off, or if you are worse off, vote the next guy in. And then vote the next guy in. Keep doing that until you teach them that you're in charge. Mm. The first thing the politician wants to do when they get into office is get reelected. That's their number one priority. It's not you. It's not their constituents. It's not the people that contribute to them. It's to get reelected. And they're never going to vote term limits on themselves. The highest office in the land has term limits. Politicians, Congress, Senate, they'll never do that. We have the power to do that. If you don't let incumbents get reelected, you're imposing term limits. And even if the guy gets in and you like him, vote him out. And vote the next guy out. And vote the next guy out. Don't let him get entrenched. Don't let him get in there. Don't let him create a power base or start to influence things or anything. That you've got people now, and I'm going off topic obviously here, but it's important to discuss. You had Mitch McConnell. Mitch McConnell gets up there the other day and does a presser, and something in his brain hits pause right in the middle of it. Now, I'm not saying this to be mean or facetious or anything. It was very clear the man had some kind of health issue at that moment. But they walked him off the stage and brought him back a little bit later after they did whatever they had to do to fix the wiring there so he could finish what he was saying, so he could pretend like he was still okay. And that was just so they could keep power. That's what they're doing. They did the same thing the same day Dianne Feinstein.
Was that where they told her to just say I?
Just say I.
Yeah.
Because she was completely oblivious as to what was going on because she was so far gone.
We see it with Biden all the time, too.
Yeah. And, you know, this isn't a crack on old people or mental illness or anything like that. But there comes a point when you're no longer effective at your job.
Right.
And when you get to that point, I used to unload tractor trailers for a living. And when I hurt my back, I couldn't do that anymore. So I knew I had to change careers. I had to go do something else that was not impactful to that. And I did. Had I kept doing it, I wouldn't be able to do my job and I'd get fired. You can't allow people to stay in power who can't do the job.
And unloading tractor trailers is much lower stakes than running the country.
That's true. That is true.
And that's the part that scares me is like you have these people that may not, and it's okay, you know, when people get to a certain age, you might not be all there.
Absolutely.
But that you shouldn't also still have the same amount of power as you did when you were fully lucid.
Right. You know, they talk about Reagan when he was in office, where he started having onsets of Alzheimer's. And do you really want someone who's suffering from a disease like that to have his finger on the nuclear button?
Yep.
Like, you have to do what is right. You have to have some moral sense of right and wrong to put your foot down in these times, or at least have the gumption and the class to step away and say, look, I can't do this anymore. I'm not up to it anymore. I can't do it the way that it needs to be done. Let a younger person come in and do this type of stuff. We as the voter have the power to do that.
The more you know.
Anyway, that's it for my soapbox for there. We're going to run over time here, but that's okay. We're going to come back with our last segment here and talk about religion, free speech, and gay rights. That should be a quick one. We'll be right back.
Insights into Teens, a podcast series exploring the issues and challenges of today's youth. Talking to real teens about real teen problems. Explore issues from braces to puberty, social anxiety to financial responsibility. Each week, we talk about the topics concerning today's youth. We look at how the issues affect teens, how to cope with these issues, and how parents, friends, and loved ones can help teens handle these challenges. Check out our video episodes on youtube.com/insightsintothings. Catch our audio versions on podcast.insightsintoteens.com or on the web at insightsintothings.com.
Welcome back, everyone, to Insights into Tomorrow. We are still covering the Supreme Court's recent decisions after a brief aside.
Sidebar into politics.
Yeah, but we're back, and this is our last point for today. Religion, free speech, and gay rights. That's a lot, but we're going to do our best. The 6-3 decision, which turned on the court's interpretation of the First Amendment, appeared to suggest that the rights of LGBTQ people are on more vulnerable legal footing, particularly when they're at odds with claims of religious freedom. The ruling was the court's latest in favor of religious people and groups, notably conservative Christians. The Supreme Court sided on Friday with a web designer, recently. The Supreme Court sided recently with a web designer in Colorado who said she had a First Amendment right to refuse to design wedding websites for same-sex couples despite a state law that forbids discrimination against gay people.
Justice Neil Gorsuch. Is that Gorsuch?
I have no idea.
I'm not very good
Neil.
with names. Neil. Justice Neal,
I'm sure he loves to be called that.
writing for the majority in a 6-3 vote, said the First Amendment protected the designer, Lorie Smith, from being compelled to express views she opposed. Quote, 100 years ago, Miss Smith might have furnished her services using pen and paper. Those services are no less protected speech today because they're conveyed with a voice that resonates further than it could from any soapbox.
Yeah, I was reading the show notes before the show. What? I don't understand what that means. Like, what is he saying?
Basically, he's saying that because it's something that's being done on the internet and has a wider reach, it's no different than if it was a printed material.
Okay, gotcha.
The case, though framed as a clash between free speech and gay rights, was the latest in a series of decisions in favor of religious people and groups, notably conservative Christians. At the same time, the ruling limited the ability of governments to enforce anti-discrimination laws. The justices split, surprisingly, along ideological lines, and the two sides appeared to talk past each other, kind of like politicians tend to do. The majority saw the decision as a victory that safeguarded the First Amendment right of artists to express themselves. The liberal justices viewed it as something else entirely, a dispute that threatened societal protections for gay rights and rolled back some recent progress. This also comes at a time when transgender people are facing increased discrimination at the local and national level, with the American Civil Liberties Union stating that there are currently 492 bills in the works around the country that would directly harm transgender individuals.
And this goes back to what we're talking about with this backsliding that we're feeling, right? This is another example of that. Using the Constitution as the weapon. In an impassioned dissent, Justice Sonia Sotomayor warned that the outcome signaled a return to a time when people of color and other minority groups faced open discrimination. It was the second time this week that the justice summarized her dissent from the bench, a rare move that signals deep disagreement. Appearing dismayed, Justice Sotomayor spoke for more than 20 minutes. Quote, "This case cannot be understood outside of the context in which it arises. In that context, the outcome is even more distressing. The LGBT rights movement has made historic strides, and I am proud of the role this court recently played in that history. Today, however, we are taking steps backwards." A Colorado law forbids discrimination against gay people by businesses open to the public, as well as statements announcing such discrimination. Ms. Smith, the woman who owned the website, who has said that her Christian faith requires her to turn away same-sex couples seeking website design services. I'm sure that's probably in the Bible. Jesus probably has a Squarespace page. Seeking website design services has not yet begun her wedding business, nor has she posted a proposed statement on her current website about her policy and beliefs for fear, she has said, of running afoul of the law. So she sued to challenge it, saying it violated her rights to free speech and the free exercise of religion.
So, you jumped on my point too quickly there. So, okay, first of all, there's nothing in the Bible that is anti-gay, anti-LGBTQ, nothing like that. There are no teachings.
There's not? I thought there was.
Nothing.
I'm not even joking. I legitimately thought there was about like
not
men.
a single mention.
Oh.
There are stories about same-sex. There are instances of it occurring in there. Nothing is ever preached against. In fact, if you go by the teachings of Jesus, Jesus says to love all men, to love all people. So there's nothing in there. How the court could even use that as an excuse, number one. Number two, I'll guarantee you there's nothing about websites in the Bible, okay? Maybe the new King Charles Bible there might be, but there's nothing in the King James Bible or before it that has anything to do with it. So that's a falsehood.
And that makes sense why Justice Neal had that quote that he had, because you have to frame it so it's legitimate.
Right.
And not a bunch of baloney.
So, and the other problem that I have here is she's not being forced to express opinions that are contrary to her beliefs. She's being contracted to produce a website for someone else. If she didn't like fur coats and she made a website for someone selling fur coats, nobody would confuse her as being the person selling fur coats. So using that as logic for why you can't produce something for someone else is bogus. So there isn't a single argument in this case that has a leg to stand on.
But it worked.
But somehow the conservative Supreme Court decided to latch onto this with as flimsy an argument as it was to set precedent again.
And to legalize discrimination.
And that's exactly what it is. That is how dangerous this Supreme Court is, and that is how broken this Supreme Court is that they took something that was so flimsy, it shouldn't have gotten past.
It's like a Judge Judy case.
Right. It shouldn't have gotten past TV court.
Yeah.
Okay. It was literally that weak of an argument. And somehow the Supreme Court decided that was important enough to listen to.
And to create such strong precedent.
Right.
Which makes you wonder that they could do it with anything, right?
The Supreme Court receives hundreds and hundreds of cases a year to hear. And they go through and they cherry pick the ones that they feel are the most important, the most impactful, and the ones that are the most influential on the Constitution. And they pick this steaming pile of crap as one of the ones that they wanted to talk about.
It's pretty tough to not argue there's an agenda when this is what they go with.
Exactly. That's why it was vitally important that we talk about this one.
Yeah.
I'm embarrassed at our Supreme Court for even listening to arguments on this case. It's that bad.
Right. And it's like, if you actually look at the case, it is just gay people trying to exist. And when you look at a lot of these anti-LGBT laws or anti-trans laws, it is just people trying to live and maybe get married. And it's like, it's always framed as if they have this like agenda, like they want to take over the country, the LGBT people.
Indoctrination.
Yeah.
You got to throw that in there,
It's
too.
a bunch of baloney, man. Like, it's these people are just trying to live and be treated fair and equally, but that's just not allowed.
No, and the worst part is the state itself had already passed legislation that prevented this.
Right. So move.
Now, the problem that I have, I have several problems with this. The other problem that I have here is this Constitution says any laws that the Constitution does not explicitly cover fall to states' rights.
Yep.
There's no anti-discrimination law in the Constitution. So therefore, if the state has a law that governs it, the state should take precedent. The Supreme Court should have had no jurisdiction over this case whatsoever because of that law that was on the books.
Yeah, should have been done right then and there.
So it should have never even gotten to the Supreme Court.
But when you can politicize anything and you can make an agenda out of it, because now it becomes an issue of the First Amendment, which isn't that the one about free speech?
Free speech and freedom of religion.
Yeah. So, but like it's...
So how does her freedom of religion trump the other people's free speech by having a website?
Right.
Someone needs to explain that one too.
Yeah. Yep. It's pretty tough. No matter what side of the spectrum you're on politically, it's pretty tough to argue that there is not an agenda here. Especially this, it's good we ended with this, because this is like the standout.
It's the smoking gun.
Yeah.
You know, not only is it an agenda, it's a poorly thought out, poorly researched, and poorly executed agenda.
And a hateful one.
Yeah, and it's blatant. Like it's like the expectation that Americans are stupid is written into this agenda, because you're not supposed to see this stuff. You're not supposed to pay attention to it. Supreme Court rule. They're supreme, so it should be okay, right? Only we're overturning other Supreme Courts, so it's really not supreme. It's kind of the okay court now.
Yeah.
Just do as we say, though. That's the hypocrisy that our country is dealing with today.
Yeah, and it goes back to that. You know, we talked about the feeling of regression and the feeling of legalized discrimination. And again, we mentioned this a lot. But if you're an audio listener, we're two white guys, so
right.
You know, it's really not impacting us that much. I can't imagine what it must be like being a transgender person or a member of the LGBT community or a minority or a woman. Like, there's just so many people out there that are, and I'm not laughing. I'm laughing because it is so horrible, right? I'm not laughing to make light of it.
Right.
I'm laughing because it is just, it's really bad.
And that's like, it's literally so bad that you don't need to be a member of the community to see how blatant
Yeah.
this is and how wrong it is. That's how bad it is at this point.
And it's not even hidden. And then they have the Republican side of this. They tend to like put the blame on the other side of like, oh, well, they're the ones that are trying to take all the power. They're the ones that are actually trying to brainwash you. When in reality, that's just not true.
Right.
It could be in some way, but not nearly as much as the right is doing.
Right.
I just don't know how you can see that and just act like, you know, if you believe in these far right conservative Christian ideas that, like, you know, that you're the minority in this. Like,
So I'm going to get insulting here for a second because I just can't make my point without being insulting. So the people that are doing this, the far right politicians and radicals that are doing this, are so blatant and so callous and not well thought out that their argument requires stupidity to believe, are doing that because the vast majority of people that support right-wing politics are stupid. They're people who don't want to think for themselves, don't want to do their own research, blindly want to follow somebody who they think is the next coming of Jesus, and generally are religious fanatics.
but they think that they are smart because they have backing like this where they're being legitimized.
They think they're smart because the people that know they're stupid keep telling them they're smart.
Yep.
Okay.
And that they have all the answers. You have to, I hear this a lot with what I do for a living. Okay. They say, oh, you can't trust the Democrats. You can't trust the liberals. They're trying to brainwash you, but you can trust me. I have all the answers. And I'm like, you are no different than if they actually are brainwashing you on the left, because you're doing the exact same thing. You're delegitimizing everything else, but you're saying you have to listen to me. I have all the answers. You can trust me.
Right. They can't provide proof or evidence or a logical argument, so their way of arguing their point is to attack the legitimacy of the other guy.
And it's working.
It's fake news. Don't listen to it. It's political sabotage. It's a witch hunt. It's never me.
Right.
You've got a former president of the United States with like 50 indictments against him right now.
And he said he's going to run from jail.
And it's not him. It's everybody else.
And it works.
But it doesn't take a genius. You don't need to be a rocket scientist to look at this and say, you're delusional.
Yeah.
Like it can't be that.
Yeah.
But the problem is their supporters don't see logic.
And though it's like when, you know, we talked about earlier when we got on our little aside about voting, right? The types of voters, the people that will vote on party lines. And now you have that with this far right, that they're going to vote. Like, you know, when Trump said he could shoot somebody and get away with it, he was right.
Right.
Like,
exactly. He literally got up on national television and bragged about inappropriately groping a woman.
And then got elected.
And got elected president. They'll vote for him no matter what.
And then they'll do it out of spite.
He gets indicted for violating espionage laws. And he gets $1 million in donations the next day. He gets indicted. Did he get indicted yet for the other one?
I have no idea. We can do another episode on that.
There's so many indictments. It's hard to keep score at this point.
Yeah.
But every time he does something wrong, he gets more supporters.
And if he does go to prison for something, I think it will guarantee that he gets elected. Like it's like the kingpin.
Well, fortunately, there's 2 indictments he's under that if he gets elected, if he gets convicted, he cannot hold public office.
Oh.
That's.
Well, then the Supreme Court will just say that, you know.
Then the Supreme Court will reinterpret the Constitution,
exactly.
I'm sure. So anyway, that's where we're at.
That's the show.
Anyway, yeah, I mean, we don't even have to summarize. It's literally that bad at this point. Before we do go, though, I want to take a moment to push the right button here, which I just did, and invite you to subscribe to the podcast if you don't already do so. You can find audio versions of this podcast listed as Insights into Tomorrow. You can find video and audio versions of all of our network's podcasts listed as Insights into Things. We're available on Pandora, Castro, Podbean, Buzzsprout, pretty much anywhere you can get a podcast these days, but not Stitcher soon. So Stitcher's going away.
Rest in peace, Stitcher.
I would also invite you to contact us, Tell us how we're doing. Argue with us. Tell us we're wrong, that we don't know what we're talking about. I'm take anything at this point in time.
The liberal check is in the mail.
You can email us at comments@insightsintothings.com. We're on Twitter at insights_things. You can find us on Twitch at twitch.tv/insightsintothings 5 days a week. If you have an Amazon Prime subscription, you do get a free monthly Twitch Prime. Throw that our way. We'd appreciate that. Or you can get links to all these and more on our website at www.insightsintothings.com. That's it. Another one in the books.
Stay safe, everybody.
Bye.
Insightful podcasts by informative hosts. Insights into Things, a podcast network. Welcome to Insights into Technology, a podcast exploring the latest in computers, networking, home automation, mobile computing, and all things technology related. Our hosts will take a deeper dive into the latest and greatest in tech trends and give you the information you need to enable your tech-centric world.
This is Insights into Technology, episode 17, From Llama Drama to Fishy Calls. I'm your host, Joseph Whalen, and this is your technology news of the week. When AI security goes wild, this article comes to us from Hacker News. Meta's Llama large language model framework recently faced a significant security issue. A high-severity vulnerability identified as CVE 2024-50050 was discovered in the Llama Stack component. This flaw allowed attackers to execute arbitrary code on the interference server by exploiting the deserialization of untrusted data. The root cause was the use of Python's Pickle module for deserialization, which can be unsafe when handling untrusted inputs. Meta addressed this issue by updating the framework to use JSON for serialization, mitigating the risk of remote code execution. The incident underscores the critical importance of secure coding practices in AI development. Deserialization vulnerabilities, especially in widely used frameworks, can have far-reaching implications. Developers are urged to remain vigilant and adopt safer serialization methods to prevent such security risks in the future. So this is a great example of how enterprises need to be exceptionally vigilant when looking to implement their AI environment. We're going through an evaluation period at my company for AI solutions right now, and we're looking at several different models and their performance and how they respond to the type of information that we need to churn through them. We didn't really set out to look at the security implications that much, but that's now changed our game set, given the news of Llama's issue, because Llama is one of the models that we were working with. This incident highlights potential security risks in deploying AI models within enterprise environments. Issues like this could allow attackers to influence your AI processing, leading to data breaches or manipulations of AI inputs. Consider a financial institution using AI for transaction monitoring. An attacker exploiting this vulnerability could alter the AI's behavior, potentially allowing fraudulent transactions to go unnoticed. So the nefariousness of what you can do with this exploit is kind of open-ended right now. It's not just a remote code execution, but if somebody can influence your AI and your AI is driving your business plans and your business models, that becomes an issue. So it's worthwhile to talk about the significant risks associated with deserialization in software. We already know that Python's Pickle module is known to be unsafe with untrusted data. So why would you use untrusted data? Sometimes you don't have a choice. Sometimes the data that you're pumping into something is not necessarily your data, but you need it for market research or for vendor relations or any number of things that you would use an external source to do research for. Exploiting the flaw can lead to arbitrary code execution. I don't know if the article, I'm pretty sure the article did not specifically cite that happening, but the potential is there. In 2024, a similar deserialization vulnerability was discovered in TensorFlow's Keras framework, which could have allowed attackers to execute arbitrary code. So what's the future of open source frameworks in enterprise security if the trust is questionable? Microsoft is leaning hard into open source. A lot of companies are leaning hard in open source right now, and you're getting this embedded deep into a lot of enterprise networks. Open source frameworks like Llama Stack accelerate your AI development, but they can also introduce security vulnerabilities, and that's really where you need to be careful. There's this overall drive to push the technology forward and use it for everything that it's worth. And I think when we get into these mindsets of rush, got to do, invent the next greatest thing, security tends to fall by the wayside. The Heartbleed bug in the OpenSSL library is also another notable example where a vulnerability in an open source component had widespread security implications. That was a little bit different. I mean, the OpenSSL library had been in place for, quite some time at that point. So it was embedded in a lot of systems, and it was embedded in a lot of systems that don't get a lot of attention. IoT devices, servers, people had a tendency to firing up a server, sticking it in a closet and forgetting about it. Fortunately, with AI, it's still kind of in its infancy here. It's not as widespread, so I think the damage probably was mitigated for the most part in this case. It wasn't that bad, but the potential for it being bad is definitely there, especially when you're talking about something as potentially revolutionary as AI. But again, this highlights the importance of prompt patching and updates. I can't overstate that enough. That this has burned so many people in the past. In this case here, Meta was pretty quick to respond. And the response, fortunately, was fairly simple, just switching over from Pickle to JSON for serialization. So it didn't require a significant effort on their part, but the timeliness helps. But the effectiveness of patches like this are only useful if you apply them, right? Despite the availability of patches, the Equifax data breach in 2017 occurred because a known vulnerability wasn't patched promptly. So it's definitely an ongoing problem. And, administrators are busy trying to keep their networks up and upgrade it and patched. Sometimes things slip through the cracks, and that's where some of these, chinks in the armor come up. So hopefully it's been mitigated. I suspect it won't be the first time that we see this type of flaw or a significant flaw in AI, considering it's kind of in its infancy stage right now. So it's nothing unusual, but it's good to be aware of it. From the Register, Dial M for malware is our next article. In a recent incident, Zach Latta, founder of Hack Club, encountered an exceptionally sophisticated phishing attempt targeting his Google account. The attackers posing as Google Workspace support, initiated a phone call from a legitimate Google number and followed up with an authentic looking email from a genuine Google address. They even provided a valid two-factor authentication code, making the deception highly convincing. A lot of skepticism arose when the caller's information became inconsistent, prompting him to recognize the scam before compromising his account. In response, Google has taken action to suspend the fraudulent account used in this scheme and is enhancing its defenses against such sophisticated phishing tactics. The company emphasized that it does not initiate unsolicited calls to users for password resets or account troubleshooting. Users are advised to remain vigilant, be cautious of unexpected communications, and verify the authenticity of any contact claiming to represent Google. So this is a good one to highlight the dangers of advanced phishing techniques exploiting trusted channels. A lot of companies rely on Google. Google has a reputation in the enterprise space as being, I don't know if they're trusted as much as they're simply accepted. In this case, a scam involved a call from a genuine Google phone number, which, if you're vigilant enough to look these things up, you could find that out. It also involves an email from a legitimate Google domain. So it was pretty convincing for the average person. It wasn't that convincing, obviously, for someone with these advanced skill sets. So how can enterprises mitigate these increasingly convincing attacks? Well, I've said it before. We'll say it here. And I think there's an article later on in the show that we're going to talk about it. But regular training sessions and sessions that focus not just on the basics of email security, but training sessions that focus on the latest phishing tactics. Every time something new comes out, you need to make your users aware of it. They need to be aware of the tactics, the technology, the targets, the attempts, the intent. And these are all evolving things. We can sit down and we can talk about checking for fraudulent emails all you want, but if you don't educate your users in how these sophisticated attacks are evolving, stuff's going to fall by the wayside here. We should also encourage skepticism of unsolicited communications. There's only so much that your IT department can do to verify and protect you from bad email. It's possible that you get an email, and this happens on an almost regular by my standards is once or twice a week. We'll get an email in from a user basically asking us to check the validity of the email. And, the first thing that I do is I congratulate that user for having the wherewithal to send that over to us. But our ability to confirm that is limited from a technology standpoint. Yeah, we can look at the DKIM and the SPF and on all the other signatures that we look for. We can verify, we can look at the message headers, we can see what the point of origin was, we can see where it came from, things like that. But once we go through all of those key checklists and rule out any blatant obvious issues with it, it comes down to the user knowing whether or not the person that sent this is a known good sender. Do we know the organization? Were you expecting this email? Have they sent these types of emails to you in the past? So a lot of it is behavioral. A lot of it is tribal knowledge of whether or not you know these people. All of that stuff is things that have to be done at the user level, and the users need to be aware of that. This isn't a matter of abdicating your personal responsibility for security and just kicking it over the fence to IT. That's not the solution. Both sides, both the IT side and the users, have a certain responsibility here to make sure it's safe. This is also a prime example of exploitation of the legitimate services for malicious purposes. This isn't the first time someone's impersonated a Google or Microsoft or another trusted company. There's many ways to do it. Usually a lot of this is domain hijacking or domain spoofing, where you'll get an email from a Google, but it's really not Google, it's GO0, and they do stuff like that, and they can slip slip through the cracks. But by utilizing Google's own infrastructure, the phishing attempt in this case bypassed most of the traditional security filters, and it demonstrates the need for more advanced detection. And that detection isn't necessarily a technological detection. Users have to exercise common sense at some point. What measures can organizations implement to detect and prevent these? Well, deploying advanced threat detection systems to analyze behavioral patterns. We're kind of getting into that realm now where you can do that in an automated fashion with some of the AI options out there. Implementing strict verification for service usage, collaborating with service providers to identify and mitigate such abuses. When something like this happens, it has to be reported. In this case, it had to be reported up to Google, and most organizations, when it's reported to them, act responsibly and they will investigate it. It also highlights the fact that service providers have a responsibility in preventing abuse. There's a number of laws out there that prevent online platforms from having to moderate and so forth. But if you're providing a service and that service becomes a danger, there has to be some follow-up, some follow-through. In this case, following the attack, Google suspended the fraudulent account. They also came back and made a public statement emphasizing that they don't initiate these unsolicited calls that were used in this case here. So what proactive steps can service providers take in this case? Well, they can implement stricter account verification. That's one of the things. Everyone has to have some level of forgot password, but if you're not using that in a way that's responsible, if you're not implementing multi-factor authentication for that, it's just a recipe for disaster. ISPs and service providers need to monitor for unusual activity patterns. Something like this, I don't know if an automated monitor would have picked something like this up, but there's plenty of other ways to monitor for this. Providing clear guidance to users, I think Google checked the box on that one with their official communications. And establishing rapid response team. When something like this happens, you need to jump on it. You need to have the right people available, and they need to know what to do. So in addition to having a rapid response team, I would also say having I've beat this dead horse for a while, but having a framework that you follow where everyone knows what the procedures are when something like this happens. People need to know what's going on. They don't necessarily have the time to sit down and figure it out when the problem's happening. So fortunately, no harm in this case here, but it definitely highlights a potential threat to all of us who probably wouldn't have caught on to a lot of these things that he did. So our next article comes to us from Bleeping Computer, the School of Hard Hacks. Education software provider PowerSchool has begun notifying individuals in the U.S. and Canada about a significant data breach that occurred in late December of 2024. The breach involved unauthorized access to PowerSchool's PowerSource customer support portal, leading to the theft of sensitive information from over 6,000 school districts. The compromised data varies by district, but may include, and this is a doozy, full names, physical addresses, contact details, social security numbers, medical information, and grades. You can do a lot of damage with that information. While PowerSchool was not officially or has not officially disclosed the total number of affected individuals, the attackers claim to have obtained data on approximately 62 million students and 9.5 million teachers. In response to the incident, PowerSchool is offering impacted students and educators complimentary identity theft protection services and 2 years of credit monitoring for the adults. Many of whom the students are now, because these records went as far back as 1985, from what I understand. The company has also initiated has initiated regulatory notifications with relevant authorities across applicable U.S. jurisdictions and is in the process of notifying Canadian regulators. Despite these efforts, PowerSchool has yet to release a detailed report on the breach, and investigators, including those by cybersecurity firm CrowdStrike, are ongoing investigations. Sorry, not investigators. So this is another example of supply chain vulnerabilities in enterprise software. We've talked about this. It seems like every week there's another one. Similar incidents such as this happened with the SolarWinds attack in 2020. It demonstrates how infiltrating a single supplier can grant access to attackers to numerous organizations. So how can enterprises assess and mitigate risks associated with third-party vendors? Well, enterprises should conduct a thorough due diligence when selecting vendors. One of the things that my company is obliged to do at this point is to flow down our CMMC 2.0 requirements to vendors. There are certain exceptions to single source vendors for some things, but some of the vendors that we deal with are small businesses that don't necessarily have the resources. They certainly don't have, in many cases, the on-staff technology support to provide the level of security required by CMMC, but we are forced to flow it down to them. These organizations can require regular security assessments, typically done by an outside firm to come in, do an audit of your systems, of your policies, of your training. You can also implement strict access controls to minimize potential vulnerabilities. The concept of least privilege should be applied across the board, which helps to mitigate a lot of these things. It also demonstrates the importance, again, of multi-factor authentication. The age of passwords, I think, is well past us at this point in time, where multi-factor authentication is an absolute must. In 2021, a major data breach at the Colonial Pipeline was attributed to a single compromised password that lacked multi-factor, leading to significant operational disruptions. So what steps can organizations take to enforce MFA? Well, organizations should implement MFA policies mandating its use. That's kind of, you have to force your employees to do it. I understand that multi-factor is inconvenient, and we've talked about how convenience and security are mutually exclusive. When I sit down and do this podcast, there's probably 4 accounts that I have to log into, and all of which are multi-factor. I don't save my passwords. I don't cache them. I don't install my password management plugins into my browser. So I have to multi-factor authenticate to 4 of these. And yeah, it's kind of annoying, but I feel a little bit safer, and I know my accounts are a little bit safer because of that. You just kind of have to do it. If it's important, you have to do it. Provide training to your employees on the importance of MFA. Give them examples. Let them see what the real world examples are. There's a ton of them out there, and if it doesn't scare your employees into using MFA, make sure they understand the consequences. If their accounts are breached and their accounts are used to violate company policies, company network, in my case, because of the extensive work that we do with DoD contracts, it's not just a matter of embarrassment to my company if the information gets out. It's potentially a violation of federal law. And I think a lot of jurisdictions would look at it that way. Breaches of this nature, and it's important to emphasize this to your employees, breaches of this nature result in significant legal and financial repercussions. Equifax 2017 breach resulted in a settlement of up to $700 million due to a failure to protect consumer data. Now, there are a lot of companies that can absorb that. There are a lot more companies that can't. So keep that in mind that, you could have a breach of your network that costs you your company. So it's important to take that seriously. How can enterprises prepare for potential legal and financial consequence of this type of thing? Well, invest in comprehensive cybersecurity measures is the first thing. Make sure you've got all of your protections on. Make sure your firewall is up to date. Make sure your intrusion detection system is in place. Make sure you have logging and log parsing analysis available. Maintain your cyber insurance policies. Getting cyber insurance is getting progressively more and more difficult with all these breaches and all these payouts that are happening. And lastly, the one thing that I would recommend is develop an incident response plan to mitigate these damages. Now, it's important to note that these incident response plans and your backup and disaster recovery plan, these are all part of a business continuity overall plan that has to be taken into account. You can't ignore these things just because they're inconvenient or because senior management might not be familiar with the technology or the terms. This all has to be integrated into the overall preservation of the company. That's it for the cybersecurity news side of this. We're going to take a quick break and come back and talk about computing news when we come back. But before we do go, I want to take a moment to remind everyone to subscribe to the podcast. You can find us listed as Insights into Things. You can get all of our audio and video podcasts there. We're available anywhere you get a podcast, Apple, Spotify, and so forth. I would also invite you to give us your feedback. Tell us how we're doing. Tell us what you like, what you don't like, what you'd like us to talk about. Are there any deep dives that you'd like us to do? We do have a couple in the works right now that we're putting together. You can email us at comments@insightsintothings.com. You can also call in, leave a voicemail for us at 856-403-8788. That's 856-403-8788. Or you can get links to all that and more on our official website at www.insightsintothings.com. We'll be right back.
Are you tired of your favorite gaming podcast finishing with a play?
Oh, no!
Well, check out No Credits Rolled, where we play the games but rarely finish them. How's it going, folks? I'm Sam Whalen, your friendly host at No Credits Rolled, the ultimate gaming podcast, where we dish out the latest scoops and reviews on all your beloved video games.
Hey, listen!
Not only that, but we spice things up with some guest interviews and even give you, yes, you, a chance to have your say. Tune in every other week for a fresh dose of No Credits Rolled, available on all major podcast platforms, and hit us up on social media at No Credits Rolled. So why wait? Let's dive into the gaming world together, where finishing games is optional, but the fun is guaranteed.
Data leaks and legal loopholes. This one comes to us from Cyberscoop. In a significant legal development, a U.S. appeals court has vacated the initial sentence of Connor Brian Fitzpatrick, known online as Pom Pom Purin, the founder of the notorious Breach Forums website. Fitzpatrick had pleaded guilty in July of 2023 to charges including conspiracy to commit access device fraud, solicitation for the purpose of offering access devices, and possession of child pornography, just to round out the trio. Initially, he was sentenced to time served plus 20 years for supervised release, 20 years of supervised release, a decision influenced by his age and a diagnosis of autism. However, the government appealed, citing Fitzpatrick's lack of remorse and violations of court terms, such as unauthorized internet use and discussions about this case on Discord. The appeals court agreed, noting the original sentence failed to address the severity of his crimes. A resentencing is anticipated, potentially leading to a harsher penalty. Breach Forums, launched by Fitzpatrick in March 2022, became a major English-language cybercrime marketplace, hosting over 14 billion individual records, including Social Security numbers and bank details. Despite law enforcement's efforts to dismantle the platform following Fitzpatrick's arrest, similar forums have emerged, underscoring the persistent challenges authorities face in combating cybercrime. So this just goes to show how the persistent threat posed by data breach marketplaces is an ever-growing concern in the cybersecurity market. After Fitzpatrick's arrest, Breach Forums was taken down, but copycat forums quickly appeared, indicating the resilience of such illicit marketplaces. Where there's a demand, there's going to be someone to meet that supply. And as long as there's a demand for the information to exploit people and to break the laws and take advantage, I don't know if there's anything you're ever going to do to stop it completely. What strategies can enterprises implement to protect themselves from data breaches? Well, enterprises could adopt comprehensive cybersecurity measures, including regular security audits, which should be done minimally annually, but probably quarterly or more. Employee training, which I can't harp on enough, on phishing and social engineering, and implementing advanced threat detection systems to mitigate the risk of data breaches. Even the most basic SOHO routers out there now usually have some level of threat mitigation, packet filtering, something along those lines. This does give some legal indication or some indication of the legal consequences of cybercrime. And we've seen some big name people, Kevin Mitnick and other folks that have been caught doing nefarious, was overturned due to his lack of remorse and continued engagement in prohibitive activities. This highlights the importance of enforcing strict legal consequences, and they should be enforced across the board. There should be no exceptions, regardless of who you are, what you do, or, what political affiliation you might be. So how do legal outcomes in high-profile cybercrime cases influence corporate security? Well, there's significant legal consequences for cyber criminals, which can serve as a deterrent, although given the ever-increasing amount and sophistication of cyber crimes, I don't know if it's much of a deterrent. Encouraging enterprises to strengthen their cybersecurity policies. I think encouraging isn't enough at this point. I think we're past the point of encouraging. I think mandating security policies is really where we're at this point in time. But more importantly, collaboration with law enforcement to combat these types of cyber threats. The federal government here in the United States has a number of programs that you can report these types of cyber crimes to for additional assistance. They can get the federal government involved if it crosses state lines on certain things. So there's a lot of resources out there, and I think administrators and IT professionals need to not hesitate to use these, even though it may be inconvenient at times. This also highlights the fact that there's legitimate difficulty in dismantling these cybercrime networks. Following the shutdown of Breach Forums, a number of new forums quickly surfaced, continuing the trade of stolen data and services, and it hasn't gone away, and it probably won't, at least not for a very long time. So what collaborative efforts can enterprises and law enforcement undertake to effectively combat the proliferation of cybercrime forums? Well, enterprises can share threat intelligence with law enforcement. They can participate in industry-wide cybersecurity initiatives. it's, I say these things now, but given a lot of the changes from the Trump administration, a lot of the cooperative coordination that the federal government had in place is rapidly evaporating right now. And we'll have to see where the dust settles on something like this. But I wouldn't use that as a deterrent to prevent you from reaching out. And we should also support legislation that enhances cybercrime enforcement. And I say that almost tongue-in-cheek because I don't think combating cybercrime is going to be resolved through legislation. Legislation can mandate adherence to cybersecurity practices, but if you're talking about legislation to prevent or to prohibit this type of activity, these people are breaking the law already. Making more laws for them to break isn't going to stop it. So if you're going to do anything, you need to come up with laws and regulations to mandate the response and the preparation that enterprises take, especially when you're talking about critical infrastructure, carriers, water systems, power systems, that type of thing. There's also an impact to data privacy regulations and compliance that's a potential here. The exposure of vast amounts of personal data on breach forums has led to increased scrutiny of corporate data handling practices. So how should enterprises adapt their data management strategies to comply with evolving data privacy regulations? We've talked about GDPR and California Privacy Act. There's a lot of legislation out there that affects enterprises now. So enterprises should implement robust data governance frameworks. And there's that word again, frameworks. They should ensure compliance with current data privacy laws. I think you don't have much of a choice there. The fines are growing significantly if you don't. They need to stay informed about regulatory changes so they can adapt to their data management strategies accordingly. There's a lot of regulation. There's a lot of local legislation happening. There's things happening at the federal level, but I think we also need to pay attention to what's happening internationally. I think Americans tend to get very myopic, and they don't see or they don't want to see developments and challenges and threats from other parts of the world. Well, the reality is a lot of the cybersecurity threats that we run into don't originate from the United States. So we have to be aware of what the regulations are in different parts of the world as well. So we'll see how things go with that. Our next article here comes from the Register. AI Wars, the fight for global dominance. That sounds exciting. Chinese AI startup DeepSeek has temporarily limited new user registrations following large-scale malicious attacks on its services. The company announced that existing users can continue to log in as usual, but new signups are restricted to ensure service stability. Despite these challenges, DeepSeek's AI Assistant app has surged to the top of Apple's U.S. App Store, surpassing competitors like OpenAI's ChatGPT. The company recently released its R1 large language model as open source, claiming reasoning capabilities comparable to OpenAI's GPT-4. Users are advised that data processed through DeepSeek's online services is stored in China. As a supplement to this, I mean, obviously this isn't that, I don't think, significant, but there is talk already in the Trump administration about investigating DeepSeek and possibly banning its use in the country like they are in the process of doing with TikTok. So I don't know how far that's going to go, but we'll see where it winds up. But this does demonstrate the challenges of rapid scaling of AI amid cyber threats. The company had to temporarily limit new registrations to ensure service stability after experiencing large-scale malicious attacks. Now, They didn't release information on what the source of those attacks were. It's possible it could have been a attack from the U.S. government. I don't know. I just don't have that information. So how can emerging tech companies balance their rapid growth with implementation of effective security protocols? Well, startups should prioritize building scalable security infrastructures from the outset. And I think the important thing to highlight there is building security. Scalable security, yes, but security isn't something that's done well when you have to bolt it on after the fact. If you build it from the ground up, it's much easier to make it work and to make it work effectively and efficiently. Enterprises should conduct regular vulnerability assessments. There's another one we like to talk about. And establish their incident response plans, which we've also talked about today. This also brings into question the data sovereignty and privacy concerns that a lot of people have about this. Users are advised that the data processed for DeepSeek's online services is stored in China, which may conflict with data protection regulations in other countries, the United States being one of them. If you are a DoD contractor, that's a no-no. So what are the implications for enterprises when user data is stored in jurisdictions with different data protection laws? Well, enterprises need to assess the legal and ethical implications of data storage. We had a recent request come through for a piece of software that was a cloud-based piece of software, and after doing a little bit of research, we determined that it didn't fit our security model, so we had to deny use of that application. And we don't do that in a way or with the purpose of inconveniencing people or making it harder for them to do their jobs. We do it out of the necessity to protect the network and the company. So the big takeaway, I think, from all of this particular article is the impact of AI competitiveness on the industry now. Everyone's getting into AI, different models, different engines. The company's AI assistant app surpassed AI's ChatGPT in the U.S., which was one of the fastest growing fastest adopted app on the App Store in years. So this signals a shift in the competitive landscape for AI, which is now being handled on a national level by several countries. Which makes me realize or think that, that's where the next landscape is for conflict, for international conflict. So how does the rise of new AI players influence the strategies of established tech companies? Well, the established companies may need to innovate more rapidly. If nothing else, this may push that competition into a constructive phase. They need to reassess their market strategies and potentially collaborate with emerging firms to maintain their competitive edge in evolving AI. You're seeing this type of cooperation. Microsoft and AI and OpenAI have been in bed together for quite some time now. You also have Apple is now in bed with OpenAI. So this cross-organizational collaboration, I think, is going to be a significant driving factor, especially when you're talking about a competitor here that has nation state backing to it. There's a lot of resources China can throw at something like that. And ironically enough, the one big highlight here is that this highly effective AI model apparently was exceptionally cheap to train. Now, if you believe some of the allegations out there, they actually wound up training their model off of OpenAI, which, I guess they didn't have to make that initial investment. So I guess that's a good thing, but I don't know, kind of scary. We're in a very dangerous age right now. Our last article today comes to us from ZDNet. Edge of your seat security. Microsoft has introduced a new feature in its Edge browser aimed at combating scareware. Scareware is malicious software designed to deceive users into believing their systems are compromised. prompting them to download unnecessary or harmful applications. This kind of is near and dear to me because I had this happen to one of my users a few years ago. The enhancement builds upon Edge's existing security measures, specifically targeting misleading pop-ups and advertisements that attempt to exploit users' fears for financial gain. By identifying and blocking these deceptive elements, Microsoft aims to provide a safer browsing experience for its users. Scareware not only poses security risk, but also leads to decreased productivity and potential data breaches if employees inadvertently install malicious software. By integrating advanced scareware protection into Edge, organizations can reduce the likelihood of such threats infiltrating their systems. This move underscores the importance of utilizing browsers with robust built-in security features to safeguard enterprise environments against evolving cyber threats. So this highlights the increased integration of smart screen technology, something that Microsoft implements in Edge. Smart screens have been instrumental in protecting users from malicious websites and downloads, and its integration into Edge enhances the browser's ability to detect and block scareware tactics. So how does how does Smart Screen differentiate between legitimate software notifications and scareware prompts? Smart Screen utilizes a combination of URL reputation services, application reputation services, and heuristics to assess the legitimacy of software notifications, blocking those that exhibit characteristics of scareware. There's a lot of questions surrounding the impact on enterprise security policies with this. Enterprises often rely on browsers as a primary interface for employee interactions with web applications. The enhanced scareware protections in Edge can reduce the risk of employees inadvertently installing malicious software, thereby strengthening overall enterprise security. So should enterprises mandate the use of browsers with built-in scareware protection for their employees? Well, probably. I don't want to say yes. I want to say probably. Implementing browsers with robust security features can serve as a frontline defense against social engineering attacks, reducing the likelihood of security breaches originating from user interactions with malicious intent. Now, it's worth noting that in order to do this, you do have to send some data off to Microsoft or whoever the security provider is that's going to be doing these analysis. So there is a slight chance that you're offloading some sensitive information, some personal information. So that's why I say it's a maybe. In order for this to work, these aren't homegrown solutions. You're not hitting against the database that's inside your network. You're sending these URLs off-site to be analyzed. And that inherently means that you will off-site some data at some point in time that you might not want to. So before you go wholesale implementing this in your organization, you might want to check to make sure that you're not offloading anything of a sensitive nature that you can't do. And if you are, engage with a provider that you can at least have an NDA so you're legally protected. But, that doesn't protect you when that provider might get compromised. So it's interesting technology. It's nice that they're proactively doing things like this. It's not unique. There have been plenty of other things out there that have done this that are not free. And I think that's the kicker here is it's budget friendly for just about everybody if it's right for you. That's all we had for our news this week. We're going to take another quick break, and then we're going to come back and talk about and finish up our talk on zero trust architecture. We'll be right back.
Insights into Entertainment, a podcast series taking a deeper look into entertainment and media. Our husband and wife team of pop culture fanatics are exploring all things from music and movies to television and fandom. We'll look at the interesting and obscure entertainment news of the week. We'll talk about theme park and pop culture news. We'll give you the latest and greatest on pop culture conventions. We'll give you a deep dive into Disney, Star Wars, and much more. Check out our video episodes at youtube.com/insightsintothings. Our audio episodes at podcast.insightsintoentertainment.com, or check us out on the web at insightsintothings.com.
Welcome back to Insights into Technology. So we're going to talk a little bit about our Zero Trust. We're going to finish up our discussion here. When we talked about it last time, we kind of went over the history of Zero Trust. We talked about the concept of trust but verify. We looked at what a castle and moat defense structure was. And then we talked a little bit about the birth of Zero Trust. So today we're going to talk a bit more about why traditional perimeter-based security models are failing. The reliance on perimeter-based models has proven inadequate due to remote work, which COVID kind of threw at us, and then we've kind of held on to it. Employees accessing corporate systems from various devices and locations create a decentralized attack surface that has to be taken into account. Cloud adoption. Everyone's moving to the cloud now. Even I am at my organization reluctantly after holding out for as long as I could. Traditional perimeters dissolve as organizations move to hybrid or multi-cloud environments. There's advanced threats. We talk about this every week. Sophisticated attackers exploit trusted credentials to breach networks, bypassing perimeter defenses. And finally, one that I've sat through numerous webinars and training sessions over, and that's insider threats. Implicit trust within the network allows malicious actors to move laterally once inside in traditional networks. So as an example, a hacker gains access to an employee's VPN credentials and moves laterally to sensitive systems because traditional models lack internal security verification. Once you're in the network, you should still need to validate and verify your credentials throughout. And you can't, you can automate some of that, but you shouldn't automate everything with that. There needs to be some level of user interaction so that something the user knows or has or is can re-authenticate them, where an automated system wouldn't be able to do something like that. So what are the core principles of Zero Trust architecture? So Zero Trust is built on four foundational principles, I should say. Least privilege access, which we've talked about many times. This is the concept of granting only the minimum permissions necessary for users and devices to perform their tasks. For example, a marketing employee doesn't need access to the financial systems, right? Another core principle is microsegmentation. Divide networks into smaller, isolated zones to contain potential breaches. A breach of an IoT device in one segment can't access core databases in another segment. Continuous verification is our next one. Continuously monitor and validate user identity, device health, and application behavior. Multi-factor authentication, real-time anomaly detection are a couple of good examples of this. And finally, Zero Trust Network Access, or ZTNA. Replace traditional VPNs with ZTNA to enable secure, granular access to specific applications rather than entire networks. For example, a contractor can access a single app without entering the main network. We've run into that a lot, especially when we have contractors and vendors inside of our network providing maybe access control, key fobs for your doors, could be internal camera access. Even some cases you've got your fire and security alarms integrated now. All these things need to be segmented off. So in this case, a real world analogy, just to kind of bring everything into focus or into perspective here, is the airport security analogy. So zero trust can be compared to modern airport security. At the gate, no one is trusted automatically. Used to be. I mean, I flew before 9/11. I knew what the overall lack of security was. Every passenger must verify their identity and pass security checks. Continuous verification occurs throughout the process. IDs are checked multiple times. Devices are screened. Access to sensitive zones is restricted. Passengers are granted least privileged access. They can enter only specific terminals or gates based on their ticket. And this, theoretically, I mean, you see breaches all the time, but this is just an example. This approach mirrors zero trust principles: no implicit trust, constant verification, and controlled access. So why zero trust matters in today's cybersecurity landscape? The increasing volume of cyber attacks and the high-profile breaches demonstrates the urgent need for zero trust. Data breaches. Over 83% of breaches involve compromised credentials or misconfigurations. Both are preventable with zero trust. We talked about the remote workforce. With more employees working outside traditional perimeters, zero trust ensures secure access without relying on outdated VPNs. Compliance is the next one. The federal government is forcing compliance on a lot of industries and a lot of companies. Frameworks like the NIST 800-207 emphasize zero trust architecture as the preferred model for federal and private sector organizations. So, a couple of suggestions for implementation once you get to this stage. Start small. Implement zero trust incrementally. Multi-factor is a great example of that. Identity verification is another way of starting out. Adopt modern tools. Use technology like ZTNA, Identify and Access Management, or IAM, and endpoint security solutions. There's a rich pool of tools out there to pull from. You also need to understand organizational risks. And you need that, certainly from a cybersecurity standpoint, but throughout the organization. This isn't just a technology-specific thing that needs to be done. Tailor your zero trust policies to your company's workflows and data sensitivity. My company, as an example, we do manufacturing, so there's a certain amount of data that comes to us in the form of technical drawings and engineering drawings. Some of those drawings can be stored in-house. The commercial drawings can be stored in-house as long as you do it securely. But we're under federal mandate with CMMC 2.0 to store higher sensitivity things, anything that's CUI, in a secure enclave. That, could be in-house. That could be in a cloud provider. That could be in a specialized vendor. Be aware of this so that when you implement your security features, you're not locking any of these areas out to people and preventing them from doing their jobs. It's a tough thing to have to do. Everything security-wise doesn't necessarily have to be crippling the organization. If it is, then you're going to run into problems with your management, with the company not being able to do its job. Zero trust architecture is no longer a buzzword. It's the necessary evolution of cybersecurity in an increasingly complex digital environment. By embracing principles like least privileged access, continuous verification, and microsegmentation, organizations can secure their systems against evolving threats. As businesses modernize their networks and adopt cloud-first strategies, Zero Trust will serve as the cornerstone of a secure and resilient cybersecurity posture. So, we didn't do a deep dive into Zero Trust. I think it was important for us to kind of just introduce it here, introduce the concepts, give you a little bit of security. We may come back and touch on this later with specific implementations. There's a couple of examples that I use myself personally. There's a couple of examples that are in place professionally for me as well. So we could talk in greater detail, but I think it's important to get these concepts down first. So that's all we had for today. But before we do go, I want to take a moment to invite you to subscribe to the podcast. You can find links to all of our podcasts on our website at www.insightsintothings.com. We do stream 5 days a week on Twitch at twitch.tv/insightsintothings. High-res versions of all of our shows can be found on YouTube at youtube.com/insightsintothings. We're on Blue Sky. You can look us up as insightsintothings.bsky.social. We're on LinkedIn. Just look for us as Insights Into Things Productions, LLC. And I would invite you to write in, give us your feedback, ask questions. We're happy to answer any questions that we can here. You can email us at comments@insightsintothings.com. You can call us, leave a message, a voicemail for us. We can get you on the show if you want. You can call us at 856-403-8788. That's 856-403-8788. And that's all we have for today. Another one in the books.
No credits rolled.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 12 of No Credits Rolled. My name is Sam Whalen, your host. Now, it's still E3 season, folks, even though E3 has sadly shrugged off this mortal coil. We're still getting conferences, we're still getting announcements, and this time on the show, we're going to cover the latest Nintendo Direct, which had some honestly very surprising announcements. And then we're going to get into my thoughts on Rise of the Ronin and Valorant on console. So that's right, PC gamers, get your pitchforks ready. I'm coming for you. But before we get started, I want to remind everyone to subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcast, wherever you get audio will be there for you. Just search No Credits Rolled. We're also on TikTok and YouTube at No Credits Rolled. So check us out there. We try to do some breakout content, some video content for you. If you could drop a subscribe, a comment, a like, anything like that always helps us out and helps out your algorithms as well. So let's start the show.
Do you know any place where sailors hang out?
So this was in the Nintendo Direct for June 2024. Kind of came out around the same time as the Xbox conference and the Ubisoft conference and Summer Games Fest and all that stuff. This was sort of Nintendo throwing their hat in the ring for this time this year. And, in my opinion, Nintendo is really swinging for the fences with this one. I think they wanted to keep up with the other summer conferences. They wanted to have some announcements that people really weren't expecting to make some headlines, and they definitely did that. So this Direct had multiple announcements in it that I personally cared about, which is one of the reasons I wanted to talk about it. Multiple announcements that I was very impressed by. I still rate it a little bit lower than the Xbox conference, but it's tough to compare, right? Because, where Xbox is at, what we expect from them, and where Nintendo is at, what we might expect from them. For someone who isn't a hardcore Nintendo fan, this conference definitely surprised me and definitely had some stuff in there that it really made me, sort of tune in and be surprised by. So we'll cover that here. So this recap comes from Adam Bankhurst over at IGN. I just pulled the list from him, and we sort of just go down there, and I cherry-pick the things that I wanted to cover. But you can always go check out the full direct yourself if you want to see all the announcements and some things I might have missed. There's a bunch of little announcements at the end that I didn't cover, because honestly, it's a bunch of games that I'd never heard of and didn't really interest me. But anyway, so I'd say there's competition here. So we'll cover the two biggest announcements first. We had The Legend of Zelda Echoes of Wisdom announced for Nintendo Switch, starring Zelda as a protagonist. And that's coming this year. Coming September 26th, featuring Zelda as your protagonist. Now, going into this, I was talking with a friend, and I joke, we always talk about, hey, what are you expecting from this conference? I jokingly said, oh, we're going to get a new Zelda game. And then we did. So that was something. I think this looks great. I'm surprised it's releasing on the current Switch, but I guess because they're doing the Link's Awakening remake art style, it makes it run easier, right? Like they're not updating the engine or whatever they run that in. They're just making a new game with it. So, I do own Link's Awakening remake. I haven't played it. I've only played the starting area, maybe 15, 20 minutes of it. I do remember it chugging when it was docked. I remember dropping frames in that. So, I don't know. I'm curious how this new game's going to run on the current Switch. I'm sure it'll get, whenever the Switch 2 comes out, I'm sure we'll get it on there as well. But they did say this is going to be the last Zelda game for this Switch, so before the new one comes out. So the last hurrah. And honestly, I think this was a huge surprise, right? You watch the trailer and it starts and people think it's going to be a Link to the Past remake, which I'm sure people would have been more than happy with. That's a game I want to check out. I started the original because I think you can play that on Switch, but I'll get into it later on in this section, but remakes get me in a lot better when it's updated and things like that. So anyway, the trailer starts and people think it's a Link to the Past remake, and then Link disappears and Zelda takes over in the narrative, and you find out it's a Zelda-centric game, which is pretty crazy. In terms of gameplay, they showed off that Zelda has a tri-rod, which, based on how it works with like copying and pasting things, it looks like it's going to be a lot of that classic Zelda Nintendo sandbox stuff where they give you, especially these last two recent Zelda games, where it's, here's all the tools, we'll give them to you right in the beginning of the game, and then you've got the rest of the game to play around and discover all the little things that you can do with these tools. And it looks like that's kind of what the tri-rod is. The tri-rod is your big tool and is what's going to be driving most of the gameplay. I think it's always nice to see something new from these franchises. Sure, it's still a Zelda game, so it's still the same IP. I guess you could call it a sequel because it looks like it's in the timeline of Link to the Past. I'm not necessarily as up on the lore for Zelda as I should be. But this, with Zelda as a protagonist is sort of what I'm driving at here, of this franchise doing something new. I think is really unique, and I think it's a good thing. I think, especially for it being the last Zelda on Switch, for them to sort of just squeeze this in there and be like, hey, we're going to give you something totally different for our sort of last hurrah on this generation of console. Now, will I pick it up at launch? I'm not sure. Honestly, it's weird for me playing things on the Switch. I just don't play the Switch very often, so a lot of times I'll wait for a sale, or if it's coming to another platform, I will wait. Obviously, this is a Zelda game, so it's not going to go anywhere else. It might depend on the price point. I might wait for a sale. I know I picked up Link's Awakening on a sale, so we'll see. But definitely, I'm sure Zelda fans are definitely eating with this because, I haven't even finished Tears of the Kingdom or Breath of the Wild. So I'm right at the end of Tears of the Kingdom, but I have yet to finish that, have yet to roll credits on it. But yeah, happy for Zelda fans and excited to see what this game looks like when it fully comes out because, it's something different. Speaking of games we're excited to see fully come out, Metroid Prime 4 gameplay. It had a subtitle. It got a new title. Let me look that up. Metroid Prime 4 Beyond. And hey, that's a cool title. I think, there's that old adage where like if you go past 3 games or 3 of something, you don't call the 4th one whatever 4. You have to give it some kind of title. Anyway, but they showed gameplay. We haven't heard about this game since like forever ago, right? E3 2017. So 5 years? No, more than that. 7 years? And we just got gameplay in this direct, just out of nowhere. It looks like Metroid Prime. I played a little bit, maybe like an hour of the Metroid Prime remake, and really, really liked it. I just never played any more of it because other stuff came up. But that Metroid Prime remake is something I really want to go back to because I was very much impressed by that. I've never played a Metroid game, and playing that game, I was like, wow, this came out. You know, I had that game when I was a kid on GameCube, but I never played it because I think it freaked me out, or the controls were too difficult to understand. I didn't know what was going on. But playing that remake, I was thoroughly impressed. And Metroid Prime 4 here looks like it's going to be more of that, but updated. I mean, it looked visually very impressive. So I'm assuming they're going to save it for a Switch 2. They gave a window of 2025, so maybe we're going to get that Switch 2 in 2025, holiday 2025. Who knows? But yeah. This was one of those handful of super surprising announcements at this direct. They just dropped Metroid Prime 4 gameplay. I mean, this was one of those games that every time conference season comes up, people bring up, are we going to get a release date? Are we going to get gameplay for Metroid Prime 4? People started to wonder if it was even going to come out. And Nintendo came out and said, hey, here it is. So 2025 is the window for that. We will see what happens there. Again, hoping they save it for a Switch 2 because the Switch is very much showing its age, and I think it's going to need something based off of what they showed. It's going to need a little bit more oomph in the hardware to really make this thing nice and pretty. All right, so next I want to cover, we had Dragon Quest 3, which then turned into Dragon Quest 1 and 2, the 2D, 3D remakes. I've never played a Dragon Quest game in my life. I think the only thing I know about, actually, that's not true. I played like 5 minutes of whatever one came to Games Pass just because it was there. It was all right, you know. It didn't really blow me away. But like I said, I played very little of it. It just didn't really capture me. And I played as the guy or the hero in Smash Brothers when that released. So that's all of my knowledge of Dragon Quest. But these 2D, 3D remakes are very appealing to me. I played Octopath Traveler 1, and I started 2 because that came to Games Pass recently. And, you know, I like those games. Never finished one, of course, because it's kind of the whole concept of the show that I don't finish games, but I play too many of them. But I really like that 2D, 3D art style. I think it works very well, especially for these kind of games. I think it's a great job. It does a great job of letting you have that retro feel, like the sprites, right? The retro pixel sprites. I think it fits very well when you're interpreting or being inspired by classic games like Dragon Quest. So, you know, I might pick this up at launch. It looked pretty cool. You know, I've never, like I said, never really gotten into these games. But if they're gonna do this art style, and this is how they're bringing it to, you know, this generation, might be something I check out. Like I said, it's always good to see classic games made available to a new generation. You know, even if it's not a one-to-one port, which some people might want. I think it's nice to have these remasters that can reinterpret the game and sort of update it for our more modern eyes. You know, I don't know why, but I've been playing the Gears of War 1 remaster just because I got nothing but time on my hands, apparently. And, you know, that game looks great, that remaster of that first Gears of War game. And the game still holds up. The dialogue still holds up. All the stuff they didn't change, these character interactions, the gameplay, all that stuff still holds up. It just got that fresh coat of paint on it. Because if you go watch footage of like Xbox 360 Gears of War, it looks awful. Like it just looks like mud and like very dark and poorly lit. But like this remaster fixes a lot of that. It makes it look much more visually impressive. And then you get to experience a classic game that if you were to try to boot it up today, if you dug up a 360, which, you know, I still have a 360, but not everybody does, it makes these games more accessible and I think more appetizing. I don't know if that's the right word, but it makes them easier to play. And I might even talk about the Gears of War remake on this show. I'm kind of saving it to see if I want to cover it because I am a big Gears fan, and this Dragon Quest remake announcement kind of made me think of it, and I wanted to mention that on the show real quick. But yeah, you know, also really for Dragon Quest, really good art. They revealed it with the announcement, this like key art, and they showed 3, and then they played like that Dragon Quest sound, like the theme. You guys know it probably if you're a Dragon Quest fan. And then they showed the other 2 games are coming too, and the very cool art. I mean, I just wanted to shout out the art. I thought it looked cool. Anyway, next game, we have Donkey Kong Country Returns HD, which, if you look it up, HD is kind of a stretch, but that arrives on Switch in January 2025. I've never played a Donkey Kong game, but Diddy Kong is my main man. I love that little guy. He's my favorite character in Smash. I like monkeys in general. They're my favorite animal. So Diddy Kong, I've loved him ever since he was a kid. He also has guns and a jetpack, which I thought was cool when I was younger. Nothing against Donkey Kong, just something about Diddy Kong I've always just found very appealing. But I've never actually played a Donkey Kong game. So, might jump in with this one. It looks like a great time, and I know people, I don't know if this game is beloved, but most of the Donkey Kong games are very beloved. It is a port. It looks pretty rough. If you watch the reveal of it, it looks like they literally just took the game from when it came out and just kind of put it on Switch. And I read this today. I was actually doing the show notes right before I recorded. Turns out this bad boy is going to cost a full $60, which is tough. I definitely will not be picking this one up at launch. $60, right? That's Nintendo. Nintendo knows what they got, and they know that the majority of people are going to pay for it. Hey, it's good that people can now play this game on Switch. It's good that, Nintendo gets a lot of flack for all their ports. And while they can be egregious, right, in terms of price point, I think having all these games available on a system that everybody can buy is a good thing, right? Like, not everybody has a GameCube, or not everybody knows or wants to emulate things. So, like, having all this stuff ported onto one, and the Switch is portable, which is another plus. But, aside from the price points, which is, bad, right? Because Nintendo wants to rake us over the coals for stuff that they have on a flash drive. I think there are benefits to it other than just, the benefit, I think, is having these games available. The downside is they're going to charge you an arm and a leg for it because they know people are going to buy them. Speaking of sort of ports, this was a pretty big announcement for fighting game people. Marvel vs. Capcom Fighting Collection, Arcade Classics, is bringing 7 beloved games to the Switch. So as someone who really wants to be good at fighting games but isn't, I also loved Marvel vs. Capcom 2 as a kid. This was a pretty big announcement. It's kind of crazy. This was just in a direct, like just kind of dropped in, not at EVO. This was insane. If you watch, go look up Maximilian Dude's reaction to understand how big of a deal this was for the fighting game community. I don't really consider myself a part of that because I don't really get it like those guys do. But if you watch Max's reaction, it's very wholesome, and you can kind of see the gravity of this announcement for the people in the FGC. And I'll sort of paraphrase him here a little bit. Like, Marvel vs. Capcom 2 is like one of the most popular games of all time. Like, people who don't even like fighting games, or are good at fighting games like myself that aren't good at them, consider MVC2 like one of their favorites. And you couldn't really play it anywhere, right? Like, you'd have to get the emulators. And now that it's just coming to Switch and Switch and PlayStation, no Xbox, unfortunately. But now that it's finally available, I think that's a pretty big deal. Plus, you're getting 6 other games. Obviously, the big headline, the banner one is MVC2, but I've never played any of the other games in this collection. Like, I want to play Children of the Atom. I forget the titles of the other ones, but like, there's something about the art style of these games. And for the record, I'm coming to these games for the Marvel side of things. Street Fighter and Capcom is fine. I don't really have much of an investment in many Capcom characters. But Marvel, I love the designs of these characters in, Marvel vs. Capcom. And, I think that game is a lot of the reason why I love the X-Men today so much. Like, the X-Men animated series, now X-Men 97, and Marvel vs. Capcom 2, I think played a lot into why I love the X-Men so much. So I'm really excited to play the other games in this collection and kind of get a feel for them and to kind of just experience these games as they were when they came out. And since X-Men 97, I've been dying to play a new X-Men game or some kind of X-Men game. So getting Marvel vs. Capcom 2 back and then all these other games to explore, pretty cool. And definitely looking forward to it. And I think coming to Switch is a great idea because then people can take it on the go. You can have tournaments wherever you want. I think in the announcement they said online is going to have full rollback netcode and stuff, which I know is a very big deal. Online play, all that stuff, I'll definitely be jumping in day one for that. 7 beloved arcade classics coming to Switch courtesy of this Nintendo Direct. Pretty big deal. So what else we got? We have Tales of the Shire, a Lord of the Rings game, lets you live a peaceful life as a hobbit. So this game's a little weird. I knew this was announced, but I didn't know like what the deal with it was, like in terms of when it was coming out or where it was coming out. It looks a little rough. It definitely looks a little rough. I mean, the people in charge of the Lord of the Rings IP, they clearly want to just squeeze as much money as possible out of it. I mean, at least this is somewhat creative, right? It's like, it's a game that isn't like Gollum or like, there was a dwarf game that came out that like, I don't even think anybody knew about. But this, you know, I think this is a good idea on paper, right? A cozy game, an Animal Crossing type game where you're a hobbit in the Shire. Great. That works great on paper. In execution, what is it going to be like? How is it going to play? Is it going to be fun? Is it going to run well? We'll have to wait and see. You know, I'll definitely wait to see what the reviews are like for this, but I'm down to try it, right? Depending on the price as well. Disney Dreamlight Valley is one that I've been coming back to recently. You know, every couple weeks I jump in there and do some things. It's a nice, you know, it's a relaxing game. If you don't want to jump on, you know, Apex and get destroyed or something competitive, you just want to kind of turn your brain off and, you know, tend to your farm or talk to your favorite Disney characters. That's kind of what I do in that game. It's just nice to kind of relax every once in a while with a game. And if I could do that Lord of the Rings, you know, I'm down. I think they showed Gandalf in the trailer because you gotta. I hope they use the music if they're allowed to. I don't know. The rights for Lord of the Rings are like all over the place. But if they can use the music, that's going to make it, you know, that's going to elevate it because that music is like some of the best music you'll ever hear in your life. So if they can just use the Shire theme, immediately a 10 out of 10. But yeah, we'll have to wait and see about that one. This next one was kind of weird, but another one of those things where when you see it, you go, wow, I can't believe no one ever made this. Looney Tunes, Wacky World of Sports. IGN says it looks like a zany good time. But this looks like NBA Jam, but with Looney Tunes. So like a Space Jam game. I can't believe this took this long to make. I wonder how it'll play. I did play a lot of NBA Jam, but I played it on mobile. This was back in the day when like I had an iPod or iPhone, one of them, for the first time. And you can get a lot of these full games on there. You used to be able to. Like I used to play COD Zombies on there. And NBA Jam was one of the games that I would play on my phone. So, you know, not quite the NBA Jam story that most people have with the beloved sports game. But having that with the Looney Tunes characters is great. I think that's a great idea. And, you know, you can maybe I don't remember much of the trailer, but if they work in different powers and things like that with the different characters, I think that's a good idea. You know, if this is under $20, that would be ideal. And, you know, pick it up with friends, play with friends. You know, NBA Jam, that kind of game I think is always going to be fun, especially for people like myself that are just awful at 2K and don't understand it. I think something a little bit easier and a little bit more accessible like this is a little bit more my speed and maybe other people's too. But that was actually the last announcement I had for the Nintendo Direct. What were some of your favorite announcements? There were a lot of quick ones I missed or didn't cover in this because I didn't really know about them. But if there was something that jumped out at you, let me know in a comment. And how would you rate this compared to the other conferences? Like I said, I would put it definitely below Xbox. But for a Nintendo Direct, you know, I kind of go into these with no expectations. And when I get multiple things that surprise me, I give that a pretty high review, a pretty high grade. So we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, I will be giving my thoughts on Rise of the Ronin and console Valorant. You're listening to No Credits Rolled.
I'm looking for sailors.
All right, and we're back on No Credits Rolled. Just got done covering the latest Nintendo Direct, and now we're going to review some games. So Rise of the Ronin is an action RPG developed by Koei Tecmo's Team Ninja. They're known for Nioh, Wolong Fallen Dynasty. They're Dead or Alive games, which I didn't know they made those. I mostly know them for Wolong. Because I played Wolong when it came out on Games Pass. I think I tried Nioh a couple times, but it really didn't click with me. Wolong I played a decent amount of until that game just got to be too much. I found the boss fights extremely annoying. And you can always say get good, but I think there were just like mechanical things where I was like, all right, there's no amount of getting good that's going to get me through this. I'm just going to put this game down. So that Wolong is sort of my point of reference going into this game. and it keeps a lot of the same feel. It keeps like the Souls-like combat that was in Wolong and Neo also. And then they put it into an open world RPG. I would compare it to like an Assassin's Creed, because that was what I kept thinking of when I was playing it. So I really, I don't want to be super negative, but man, is this game boring. I really wanted to like this game. I gave it multiple attempts trying to just sort of brute force my way through the story and to unlock more mechanics and new characters and stuff. But after a while, I kind of just had to give up, honestly. It just was really boring. The combat is the combat is the biggest thing this game has going for it, right? It's the standout because this is what this team does well with Wolong and Neo. But it's also basically all you're doing. Every single mission that I did in maybe the, 15 to 20 hours I played, maybe less, maybe like 10 to 15, somewhere in that range. I could check my game clock, but I'm not going to do that. Every mission seemed to be go here, kill guys, right? Sometimes you fight a boss, which is like usually a 1v1, or in story missions, you get more cinematic boss fights that are akin to something you see in Wolong, where you get like a cutscene in the beginning and then you fight, and there's different mechanics and things like that. But like, there's so much combat in this game, and there's like nothing else. There's stealth mechanics, but it's like baby's first stealth, where you sneak up on a guy and you can one-shot him unless you don't do enough damage, then you just do a bunch of his health. There's cool takedowns, like you can unlock an ability where there's a very lengthy RPG skill point system that I didn't get super far into because you need a lot of points, and I didn't do it. But like, you can get a takedown where you use your grappling hook to grapple a guy up off the ground and like snap his neck, which is fine. But like, I don't know. There's so much about this game that I feel like has either been done before in games like Assassin's Creed or done better in games like, Ghost of Tsushima and stuff, that there's really nothing in this game that makes it stand out for me to make me want to keep playing it. It just felt very vanilla and very bland. Now, the combat is fun for a while, right? They do I think Neo had this, where there's different stances. So it's like rock, paper, scissors fighting enemies, where certain stances work better against other stances. And, they tell you if it's a blue arrow, you're doing the right stance. If it's a red arrow, you're not. And then you switch it, and then you just kill them. It feels very samey after a while. There are cool executions, right? You can break enemy stagger bars and then get cool executions off. It's still got that Teen Ninja feel that people like, that I enjoyed in Wolong, but again, eventually got bored of. There isn't a whole lot of enemy variety, right? I mean, there's, at least in my time that I played, maybe things changed down the line. There's spear guys, there's shield guys, there's sword guys. If you've played Ghost of Tsushima, it's very similar enemy types. The boss enemies, there's definitely a variety, because a lot of the big, like, tentpole checkmark bosses have their own mechanics, so those are fun. Except for one, the one I did, you have to fight like your blade twin, and that first fight is like super aggravating. But I got through it, so I'm proud of myself for that. But anyway, yeah, I just found so many of the missions to be so samey in terms of the combat. There's a bond mechanic similar to like a Persona or like a dragon kind of, where you can increase your bond with these different companions, and then you can do companion missions to further increase that bond. And I thought that was okay. I found some of the characters to be somewhat interesting. It's like in that time period where Japan and other countries are sort of meeting for the first time. So you've got American, I think they're either American or English, I don't remember. Influences, probably English, right? Like historically wise. I watched like 4 episodes of Shogun, so that's kind of all I'm going off of. I need to go back and finish that show. But there's like those people you can interact with, and they're like a whole different faction of enemies, but they still function the same. They still have got swords, and instead of bow and arrows, they have guns. And instead of being like big guys with clubs, they're like really funny. I highly recommend you look up the English like heavy type in this game. It's just a giant man with axes. It looks like something out of like Fallout BioShock Infinite, like those the robots in that game for like the theme park. It looks like that. It's like a freakish, like hulking man with axes. It's very strange. So I guess that's different. That's something. Yeah, interesting things, some positives about the game. That history stuff is cool if you're into that. I think there are some historical figures, but I don't know enough about the time period to really know it. The mixing of the colonial stuff mixed in with the Shogun stuff is cool. If you've watched the Shogun show, it's kind of like that. So yeah, I mean, that's cool if you're into sort of period pieces like that. But again, I think games like Assassin's Creed do that historical fiction storytelling so much better. There's a story twist in the beginning, which they literally just do the Assassin's Creed Odyssey twist. If you've played that game, having a dual protagonist in that, it's like the same twist so far as I can tell. You know, that is what it is. It happens very fast. I feel like the reveal in Assassin's Creed Odyssey takes a little bit longer. In this game, it's like after you finish the beginning of the game, it's like right away that you're like, oh, that's what we're doing. Okay. So, you know, whatever. Biggest positives, I was able to make my character look like Vicious from Cowboy Bebop, kind of, which was cool. Honestly, that carried a lot of the game for me and kept me invested more than anything, like pretending I was Vicious and having a big giant sword and like messing people up. Here's the thing too. Like, I usually don't have a problem with these Ubisoft checklist open world games. I can turn my brain off, no problem, and fulfill that list. But for some reason with this game, it just like there was something about it that just didn't really get its hooks in me. And just for fun, I booted up Assassin's Creed Mirage last night to sort of get a feel for what modern AC feels like before Shadows comes out in a couple months. And the polish of that game, you know, I talk a lot of smack on Valhalla because I really did like that game. But even still, like, the polish of that game, I think, is what helps me stay with it, right? Like, doing parkour, like Assassin's Creed Mirage, I have yet to finish it, but it's like, it's pretty mid for an Assassin's Creed game. But the feeling of doing the parkour and stuff and the way that story sort of, or not the story, but the way that world immerses you in it, I think is just done so much better in an Assassin's Creed game than it is here. And like, there is traversal mechanics in Rise of the Ronin. You get like a Breath of the Wild type glider, so that's cool. But you don't ever feel fast in it. You can't do like the Batman Arkham like dive and come up to go fast. There's like, you just go in a straight line until you run out of stamina and then you fall. It's kind of boring. What else? Oh, you get a grappling hook in Rise of the Ronin, so you can grapple up to different things, but you can only grapple on certain points. So it's like another thing where it's like, okay, well, this could be cool, but then it all ends up being kind of boring. You know, I'm being pretty negative here, but I've never been this bored by a game in a while, which is kind of crazy. Cause I ask my friends, I play all kinds of garbage that keep, like, I played, you know, I've talked about it before. I played a lot of Avengers, and that is the epitome of turn your brain off gameplay. But like, I still play that game, and something about this game just did not work for me, which I found pretty surprising, honestly, because I thought I'd be able to at least finish the story. But hey, if you like open world games, you know, this is one you could try. If you like Team Ninja games and their kind of combat, you're going to get a ton of that. So you could check it out. And if you like this time period, right? Because I think it is a good, well, I don't know about historically accurate, but it shows this time period, which not a lot of games cover. So, you know, you could check it out if you're into that too. But otherwise, I would honestly say you can skip this one. I just think it, you know, when it came out, it was sort of dogged for being middle of the road, boring. And it is. So, you know, I remember saying this when I did my Suicide Squad review. You know, sometimes the critics are actually dead on. And I think this is another example of that. So it's up to you. You know, in my opinion, I would say skip it. But if the things I mentioned here sound like they might be appealing to you, then hey, go check it out. You know, who am I to tell people, you know, what makes a game fun and what doesn't? Maybe this will appeal to you. So the other game I want to talk about today is Valorant. Of course, finally coming to console with a beta. This was announced back during Summer Games Fest, I think, or the Xbox conference. I don't remember. But I was able to get beta codes for it, and all my friends have been playing it for about a week or two now. So my biggest thing with Valorant is that it's very weird for me to have to learn the language of a new game, since I'd never played CSGO or games like that. I went into it thinking it was going to be more like Overwatch or Rainbow Six, but it's really not close enough to either of those games to compare. It's sort of its own breed, its own beast. So I'm learning the language of this game, and a lot of it comes down to just aim, right? Just be better at aiming. And there's character abilities, but they're not as present as I thought they would be, right? Like, you play Overwatch, And like the character abilities are extremely important in that game. I've got some complaints about Valorant, but again, you can just tell me to get good, which is fair. There's a lot of orbs. This is like, I've been complaining about this to my friends a lot, so they're probably tired of hearing it. There's too many orbs in this game. So many characters have just balls that they throw or walls of color. Lots of balls and walls that aren't visually distinct enough to tell what is happening. Like I know this game is all about sightlines. So a lot of the balls are just like smoke grenades or like balls that obstruct your sightlines. But some of them hurt you. And some of them are walls that hurt you. And some of them are like, I was in like a water prison at one point that blew up. I don't even know what that was. Again, you're probably raging if you're a PC gamer or like you Googled this stuff. I've got to look up many guides for this. So I'm trying to just learn as I go. But like when everyone's just chucking balls at each other, I think it can get a little confusing. There's a lot of like status effects that you can get hit with, a lot of flashbangs, and the flashbang, the way they show it in this game is really disorienting. It's not just like a screen that turns white. It's like a point on your screen that then emanates out and like covers your whole vision, which is unique. I wish the abilities were more distinct and able to tell who does what. And maybe that's not the point, right? Maybe it's just supposed to be, okay, we all kind of do sort of similar stuff in terms of obscuring sightlines. I don't know. It is what it is. Again, I got to get good. I got to lock in. This isn't really a complaint, but I think the characters look way better in their art illustrations than they do in the game. I was sort of let down by the character designs for the most part in game, but after matches, you get this like cool art of all the characters, and they look great in that. And I went into this game thinking that like, because I know Riot does League, stuff like that. Like I thought they were known for their super cool character designs. Maybe they are. I haven't really played a whole lot of League, but just overall, I felt that I was kind of let down by the designs of characters in this game. I picked Breach because I thought he looked the coolest for my character token. Now I know because of how this game works, everybody kind of has to be the same hitbox. You can't have like an Overwatch situation where you've got like a Reinhardt up against a Tracer. Like everybody has to be the same size. So that probably limits them a little bit. But yeah, again, I think my expectations were just too high for this game going into it because of how sort of praised it is. And it's praised rightfully so. I just think I went in with the wrong impressions. It's not a Valorant thing. It's a me thing. What else we got? I don't like the maps. I know I'm just complaining more. I think the maps are pretty lame. Again, everything goes back to sightlines here, but I keep making these comparisons to Overwatch. I think the Overwatch maps are one of the things Overwatch, not the design in terms of gameplay, but the design in terms of like feel and attention to detail and like capturing the feel of whatever location it's set in. There's like, I couldn't tell you the different maps in Valorant, really. Two of them are very similar. And it's just, again, I went in with different expectations, and that's not really what this game's about. This game is about, clicking heads, right? And not necessarily can I hit a beer bottle on a table and break it. But hey, different strokes for different folks, I think. I do wish there were more guns. Everybody ends up using the same 4, I feel like. But hey, people want to win, and if those 4 guns are good, then why use anything else, right? A closer comparison is Rainbow Six Siege, but there are, I think, a wider variety of guns in that game. It's not just, use the Vandal because it's the best gun, or use the Ghost because it's the best handgun. I don't know. I just think I wish there was a little bit more variety in that, because then it's like, well, everybody's using the same guns, and there really isn't like that X factor. But hey, that's enough complaining from me. Some positives. I think kills are satisfying to get. You feel like a real gamer. It does the Call of Duty thing I love, where stuff pops up on your screen and you get feedback for kills. Love that. Always a sucker for that. I like the music quite a bit. I think it really adds to the tension of close matches. I've talked about Siege before, and when that music kicks in with a tense diffuse situation or plant situation, I think it can really add to a match, and Valorant does the exact same thing. There's cool like techno music. It's like you're in the Matrix. So the music is great. There's character banter. I love that. I've been talking about Overwatch so much. I love anytime characters interact in the world. I think that's super cool. Again, not a gameplay thing, but I think for me, it just kind of contributes to the overall experience. What else I got? Oh, all the guns, even though I complain there aren't enough of them, I think they all look great, especially the shotguns. Like, I think the shotguns look super cool, but even though they suck, again, from what I've played, I think all the guns look pretty great. And I think they kind of knocked it out of the park with those designs. So I understand why this game is so big on PC, right? I mean, the whole thing is about aiming and shooting, and that's like the number one thing you can do on a PC effectively and quickly and to the level of like a pro gamer. And it's, it's under rotation still on console. I don't know how long this beta goes for, but it's nice to have a new game in our rotation, and it's nice to have these competitive games where we can pop off every once in a while and get that dopamine hit. So yeah, it's in our rotation on console with me and my friends. We'll see if it stays there, but I'm glad to have played it. I'm glad I'm experiencing this game. This was one that I've wanted to play for a while, good or bad. And it's nice that I'm finally able to now that it's coming to console. So I think that is a plus overall, despite my criticisms, is that more people can now play this game. But what do you think? Are you play Valorant? What's up? You like Valorant? You a fan of Valorant? Let me know. Anyway, that's actually all we got for episode 12 of No Credits Rolled. I want to thank you so much for listening. If you've made it this far, you can always email questions or comments to nocreditsrolled@gmail.com. Call in and leave us a voicemail. We do have a phone line, 856-209-0713. We might just play it on the air. Make sure to subscribe to No Credits Rolled on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, anywhere you get your podcast. And if you're feeling generous, you can check out the Patreon. Just search No Credits Rolled. We've got different tiers that you can subscribe to there, where you can tell me when I should be playing. Anyway, that's all I got. I'll see you next time on No Credits Rolled.
Insightful podcasts by informative hosts. Insights into Things, a podcast network. Welcome to Insights into Entertainment, a podcast series taking a deeper look into entertainment and media. Your hosts, Joseph and Michelle Whalen, a husband and wife team of pop culture fanatics, are exploring all things from music and movies to television and fandom.
Welcome to Insights into Entertainment. This is episode 150, a strong finish. I'm your host, Joseph Whalen, and my rested and relaxed co-host, Michelle Whalen.
Hi, everyone.
How you doing today, dear?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing well now that I've gotten everything back up and running here.
And you're not cursing or...
It shocks me. We just did a podcast yesterday. Mm-hmm. Everything worked perfectly fine throughout the whole thing. Didn't do anything to configuration, came in, turned everything back on, and nothing worked.
And nothing works, of course. That's how it always is, isn't it?
I love technology.
Yes, you do.
That is the bane of my existence most days. So we're back after a relatively long hiatus.
Yeah, I don't even remember the last.
It's been quite some time, yeah.
Yeah, it's been a while for us, at least.
We have. We've been recording our other ones. We haven't found all that much to talk about, really.
Right, because we kind of feel like we're in a little bit of a rut.
Yeah.
Where we're not sure where we want to go with things. And, for those of you listening, watching, maybe give us some ideas. What is it that you like about our podcast? What don't you like about our podcast? What can we do to improve?
Yeah.
What would you like to hear us talk about or not talk about or review or whatnot? I think that's where we kind of were feeling like we were more like an entertainment show.
Yeah, well, Insights in Entertainment kind of would have made sense being an entertainment show.
Right, but like an Entertainment Tonight or something.
We were doing too much news reporting and
Right. And it was something where we wanted to be topical, but we also didn't want it to be, this person passed away, or, this
Right.
thing or that thing.
Well, we didn't want to
and,
regurgitate somebody else's news stories and
Right.
just stick to that.
Right. So we're still kind of trying to figure out what it is that we want, I guess. And so again,
Took us 140 some episodes to realize we didn't like what we were doing. Go figure.
no, we've had different variations throughout the 150 episodes.
We
so,
have. We've
yeah.
tried
Hey,
different,
you know
different
what?
things.
Some podcasts don't even make it to 150.
Yeah, that's true. That's very true.
So there's that. So again, still trying to figure out what we want to be when we grow up.
Right. If we want to grow up.
If we want to grow up. Well,
That seems to be the real challenge.
yeah, no.
But after a long hiatus, we're back in a revamped studio. We completely redid the studio. We upgraded some of our equipment. If you have watched previous episodes of the podcast, you'll notice that our positions are reversed, so we changed things up dramatically there.
Yep.
And we had some interesting experiences to share. First that we're going to talk about was from a trip we took up to Niagara Falls a few weeks back. Had fun with that. That was
we did.
interesting. Sad little town because I didn't have my passport and Maddie didn't have hers, so we couldn't go into the fun part of Niagara Falls, which is the Canadian side.
Yeah, we'll get more into that
Yeah,
when we start. But yeah.
And then we have a new convention in town, which we attended. That was potentially a really good convention. They just didn't advertise.
Right.
So hopefully the
They'll be
poor
back.
turnout didn't turn them off, and they will be back.
Yeah.
And then we're going to wrap up with some thoughts on a few of our favorite shows coming to an end. And then we have some afterthoughts that I just threw in literally in the last 5 minutes to finish things off with. But before we do that, though, I do want to take a moment to invite our listening and viewing audience to subscribe to the podcast. You can find audio versions of this podcast listed as Insights into Entertainment. And as always, you can find audio and video of all the network's podcasts listed as Insights into Things. We're available on Google, Apple, Spotify, Stitcher, pretty much anywhere you can get a podcast. I'd also invite you to write in, which, we've already solicited your input here, but you can email that over to us at comments@insightsintothings.com. You can hit us on Twitter at insights_things, or you can find links to all that and more on our official website at insightsintothings.com. Shall we get into it?
Sure, let's do it.
All right, here we go. So the first thing we're going to talk about is the Strong National Museum of Play, which when we were up in Niagara Falls, we actually went out to Rochester for a day trip because it's a bit of a ride from Niagara Falls, and found that we probably needed much more than one day to do this museum.
Yeah, it was definitely, we spent pretty much the whole day there, and we still didn't get to see everything. There were a few areas that we were just tired because we didn't expect to have so much to see. And we kind of said, if we ever come back to the area, we would probably do an overnight in Rochester, just because Rochester had so many different things to see and do that we didn't get a chance to do. So now this was something you had heard about the museum. You remembered it from a show that you watch.
Yes, it had appeared. In fact, they had a display at the museum.
Right.
It was the most appearing facility on the TV show that I watch called Mysteries at the Museum that goes around and profiles different exhibits at various museums, and it was there. It appeared on the show, I think, 17 times.
Yeah, something like that.
So that was where I had heard about it, and on the drive up, I was looking for things that we could do, and it came up in there, and I thought, hey, that would be really neat, but not on the way up because we knew it was going to take some time.
Right, because at first we were like, all right, well, do we do it on our way to Niagara? Do we take it as a day trip? And as it turned out, because we really didn't have anything planned for our trip, we said, okay, well, this will be the day that we'll go. And it ended up probably being the highlight of our trip, besides the one restaurant that we really enjoyed. But that's a whole other.
We'll plug them too by the time we're done here.
Sure.
But yeah, no, the Strong National Museum of Play, also known as just the Strong, is in Rochester, New York. It was established in 1969, based initially on a personal collection of a Rochester native, Margaret Woodbury Strong. The museum opened to the public in 1982 after several years of planning, cataloging, and exhibition development for the museum's new building in downtown Rochester, which the building itself is just amazing to see. It's massive. It's got probably one of the most incredible designs I've ever seen for a museum itself, both inside and outside, and it's just a wonder to see.
Yeah. So for at least 15 years after its opening, the mission of the museum was to interpret the social and cultural history of average Americans between 1830 and 1940. Under the direction of H.J. Swiney and William T. Anderson, Mrs. Strong's collection of dolls and toys, American and European decorative arts, prints, paintings, Japanese crafts, and advertising provided a firm foundation for this mission and were supplemented with collections purchased and donated to more fully support the museum's early mission. The museum received considerable local and national publicity and support and substantial financial support from the National Endowment for the Humanities Exhibition and Public Programs Division.
And in the 1990s, the museum's board of trustees and director changed the museum's mission to collecting, preserving, and interpreting the history of play. Since then, it was refined and has increased its collections, hundreds of thousands of them. And believe me, we didn't get to see them all. There's so many there.
Right.
It's been expanded twice, and in 1996, it was expanded twice in 97 and 2006. The museum is now one of the 5 play partners of the Strong, which is also home to the National Toy Hall of Fame, the International Center for the History of Electronic Games, and the Brian Sutton Smith Library and Archives of Play, and produces the American Journal of Play.
The National Museum of Play is the only collections-based museum anywhere devoted solely to the study of play. And although it is a history museum, it has the interactive characteristic of a children's museum, making it the second largest museum of that type in the United States. The museum includes exhibits that interpret the key elements of play, as well as allow guests to explore the worlds of Sesame Street, the Berenstain Bears, Reading Adventureland, and the Dancing Wings Butterfly Garden.
The museum's exhibits are immersively themed for video games, storybooks, television shows, education, nature, history, comic books, carousel, and train rides, and they do have a massive carousel there, and children's lifestyles. E-Game Revolution is the first permanent video game exhibit in the U.S. and includes the World Video Game Hall of Fame. The National Toy Hall of Fame is at the museum. Dancing Wings Butterfly, as we mentioned already, features thousands of butterflies and is the largest indoor butterfly garden in New York. The Berenstain Bears Down a Sunny Dirt Road is an original permanent exhibit produced in partnership with the Berenstain family. So I was in awe, really, of the whole thing.
Yeah.
It was just shocking, the size, the quality of the collection. One of the things that really kind of caught my attention was a number of the exhibits were interactive in that they would ask your input. And as you provided your input, they would tally the input of the visitors and use it in the various studies that they do, that they release in their magazines and books. So it was kind of neat being able to be part of that, you know, a little bit of part of that history and that knowledge that's preserved there. But unfortunately, we just didn't get to see the whole thing. We didn't have enough time to see the whole thing.
Right. Because, again, it was just one exhibit after another. And it was like, well, what's around this corner and what's this corner? And it was just so well done. And what was interesting was going back, which I did today, because they did have a bunch of different plaques about Margaret Woodbury Strong and her background. And she was an only child, and her parents were very affluent, and she traveled a lot with her parents. So by the time she was 11, she had probably seen more of the world than most people do in a lifetime. And because of that, she would always collect little toys and treasures from these trips. And her parents were also collectors as well. Her father collected coins and her mother collected Japanese art. So it was kind of like the hobby of collecting things. And that's how her personal collection actually started, to the point where she actually built 2 wings onto her house in Rochester to display these things, and would have people come to her house and sign a little guest registry that they had been there. And over time, that was when the Historical Society kind of came in and said, hey, we really should do something with these. And that was kind of the start of the museum. And when she passed away, she had willed all of the items to start this foundation. So, it was all started just by a little girl collecting, toys, and just at the time to be able to see. And that's what's so interesting is, some of the sections, they kind of go through the history of, here's the history of a doll, from the 1800s to now. And it's so well done and so well preserved. And then you have, the board game section, and here's what board games were like in the 1800s to now. And again, just the video game section, which was, we probably could have spent so much more time just with the video games and the history of the video games and how it's evolved. And you figure the video games, that's a much smaller window of time that they have been around versus, some of the other things. So it was just so much to do, and for all ages, and it was funny because when we were thinking about going, we know of the Please Touch Museum in Philly. And that's one of those things where little kids go. Once your kids get to a certain age, you don't usually go back there. But with this, there were people there that didn't have kids who were visiting the museum, because there's just so much to see and do. It's a real museum. And for, the kids at heart, or you've played, anybody that goes there, you're going to find something that you've played with that was in your personal collection there. And, just finding the history of Legos and how Legos kind of came to be. And that was really fascinating, and all the different things.
Well, and the other thing that really kind of struck me was that the entire facility was geared towards play and entertainment, to the point that even when we went to get lunch, the cafeteria where they served lunch, you had a skywalk that you could do, and it was various levels, and a kid strapped into these harnesses and could walk the sky over your head while you're sitting there eating. or even when we left, they had a little coffee shop when you come in and you leave, where you just stop and get a little snack, a little pastry, have a little refreshment. But they've got board games on the shelf there that you can just pull those out and just play those while you're sitting there eating. So, like, literally everything that they had there was geared towards it. It was one of the most immersive experiences in the spirit of what the museum stood for that I've ever seen.
Yeah. And the other thing that was really interesting was they had books all over the place that you could take out from their library. So obviously we couldn't have done it because we're not local. I'm sure that, it's something where you go to check it out. But, hey, if your little Tommy's reading a book and thought it was really cool, we'll borrow it. It's a big giant library with everything else.
Yeah. Well, and even to that point, over where the Berenstein Bears is, they have an entire storybook area. And it's not just a place where you can sit and read. It's a place where they've got the props and they've got the toys and they've got the scenery. It's a place where the books that the kids are reading can come to life right in front of you there.
Right.
I can't imagine driving somebody's imagination any better than that. The one was the mystery room.
Yes.
Talk about that for a little bit.
That was kind of really cool. We kind of came around this corner and it was kind of set up like a haunted house. But what was awesome was it had like secret passageways where you could go behind the walls and spy on the people that were in the room.
Through the portrait. You could
through
look
the
through the eyes of the
you
portrait.
could look through the portrait. And then when you were on the other side, there was an area where there were buttons to do sound effects, so you could make it sound like a screeching cat or a ghost or chains and scare the people that are in the other room. So, that was just really neat. One of the other sections that Maddie and I had gone to, where it was kind of the fairy tale area, they had a big, giant. And they had like a pirate ship. Well, you could walk across the pirate ship and then there was a bridge. And then there was like a little nook area where you could kind of sit and just read if you wanted to. That was up, back, hidden away, away from everything. So all these little nooks and crannies of places to go and hide and explore. And when you get someplace, oh, look, there's a plaque and here's some information about a story that this is based upon or something. So just really cool, just so much to see and do. Where it would really be nice to go back there and spend 2 days doing it.
We need to figure out a way to plan to get back up in that area and see the other stuff that's up there.
The Rochester Institute of Technology, since we're going to be visiting some colleges this coming year.
That is true. So anyway, that was the Strong Museum of Play that we went to, and there'll be links in the show notes. Did
you have a video for that?
Actually, I think I did, and I didn't play it. I guess I should have probably played that, huh? We probably could have talked over the video.
It's okay. We liked it so much, we'll do it again.
They had a giant Mr. Potato Head that was a remote control Mr. Potato Head you could play with.
Oh, and the superhero section, which was...
Their superhero section was huge.
Yeah.
They had interactive things that you could do there. You could great picture opportunities for it. So
more of the little fairy tale
gingerbread house. You had
section.
A castle there. You had a dragon. Everything was so interactive.
Oh, this was one of the hidden nook areas. And then again, Harry Potter stuff, Narnia stuff. So up until, current items,
and
obviously.
Some of this stuff was like literally museum grade things that you would not normally find in stores and stuff as well. Oh, and they had a train. Yeah, they had a train inside too.
Right. They did actually have, and then the different, school area type things. Then a whole huge section of Sesame Street with a huge Big Bird and play area and stuff. And then here's part of the history of the dolls.
And the dolls were one of the interactive ones too, where you got they asked you a series of questions about the dolls. They showed you like the 1860s dolls and the moderns, and they asked simple questions like, are these the same type of play? And they went into details.
And of course the little play Wegmans that you could go into and shop, which was adorable. Because we love Wegmans. And then Snoop, basically any character, and our daughter loves SpongeBob, so that was, woo, yay, SpongeBob was there.
The video game section was because it was a walk down memory lane to begin with, because it was a lot of home video games and stuff like that. A lot of classic World War II era type toys that were in there that you just don't see, and tons of Star Wars. They had probably 4 or 5 different Star Wars displays, which is,
and it was Star Wars of every generation,
right?
Between the old, the new, the original.
No sequels though, which I was okay with.
You were totally okay with that. Buffy was even represented.
Action figures had their own section there, which was awesome. They had the original promise box for the 1978 Star Wars figures. And then just classic toys that if you saw anywhere else, they would look like creepy dolls.
Right, but when they're all
they
put
were
together,
presented so well here that you could appreciate the history.
Yeah, yeah. And you go, oh, wow. And again, you go, I had that, or,
And that was every corner you turned. Oh, I had that. I played with that.
or
I had
my
a friend
neighbor had that.
Right.
I've played with that before. I had that before.
Remember they had the light bright section there? In the video game section, they even had recovered a copy of the E.T.
The E.T. game.
that was buried out in the desert.
That was funny.
So that was interesting.
And I tried playing that and realized, wow, this game really does stink.
Oh, and their dollhouse section.
Oh my gosh.
They had every possible dollhouse room imaginable.
Right.
On display.
And like multiple houses and basically explaining how dollhouses, here's the first Lego set, but with the dollhouses talking about how usually it was a model of the child's own house, made with pieces from their house, and kind of the history of how dollhouses kind of came to be, and that the idea behind a dollhouse was to a little girl to be prepared to be a mom and have her own house.
And you learned that Samsonite was the first dealer in the United States for Legos.
I went, luggage?
Yeah.
What? You bought a piece of luggage and you got a Lego house? What? How'd that happen? So that was, amazing to see. And of course, then you
Solitaire.
See Solitaire.
Right. So you had Solitaire. And there was it was a dedicated display just for Solitaire because it had the old mouse and everything with it,
and which my mom had, so it was kind of funny. And the World Almanac to play Where in the World is Carmen Sandiego,
right?
Because you didn't have Google to look up things.
And that's the thing with a lot of their displays. It wasn't just, oh, here's the topic. It's here's all the supporting things that went around with it,
right?
That made it all that more familiar for you.
Yeah, absolutely. And it was good that we took all these pictures because we were running out of time here's the whole thing with the E.T., being buried and stuff like that. But just to be able to go back and look and see what we missed, really, but yet at least got pictures of. And
what was neat was they gave it all to you mostly in chronological order, so you could actually see the evolution, whether it was the evolution of play, the evolution of the technology. You could see how you got from the 1970s, I'll say, which is kind of where I pick things up until modern times, and you can see how the technology's changed, and you realize people still play the same way,
right?
That really hasn't changed all that much. It's just the toys, the tools that we use to play.
We're a little bit more sophisticated with the way.
Absolutely.
But to be able to play some of these older toys would be...
And the selection of board games that they had was mind-blowing.
Board games I didn't even know existed.
And they even, they still take donations of toys and games and stuff like that. And they'll curate them. They'll get the backstory for them. And, they make them available on display. I can only imagine if that's everything that they've got on display there. What do they have that they don't have room for right now that they haven't put on display yet?
You know that they probably, move stuff in and out, change the displays, every now and then. So, yeah, I can't even imagine what their back room looks like.
And the technology that they had on display. They had one room where it was probably a massive wall that was, 50 feet long, and it had projections on it. Projectors, throwing various interactive things on there. But you could walk into the projection and actually interact with the displays. You could, it was a kid's toy room that they were displaying.
That was part of the Toy Hall of Fame display.
You could walk over,
which is what these pictures are showing.
Virtually pick something up off the shelf and play with it or bounce a ball or whatever.
Right.
And then you had the one wall that was the tall screen that you were able to do interactive bubble popping and
Right,
stuff like that
right.
with. So just a lot of different things to keep you occupied, to keep your mind engaged, and to just have fun.
Yeah, and that was really the whole point of it. So
Yeah. So the Strong Museum of Play in Rochester, New York. We'll be right back. For over 7 years, the Second Sith Empire has been the premier community guild in the online game Star Wars: The Old Republic. With hundreds of friendly and helpful active members, a weekly schedule of nightly events, annual guild. Visit us